Chapter 2901. Above Divine Dragon Island. Boom. Crack. The wind and clouds surged, thunder and lightning roared, instantly alarming all the dragons. What's going on? Everyone ran out and looked at the sky suspiciously. Why does it look like a heavenly tribulation again? It doesn't look like one. It's a heavenly tribulation. Who's going through a tribulation again? Look, isn't that Qin Feiyang and Qin Batian? Could it be Qin Feiyang's tribulation again? Soon, everyone saw Qin Feiyang and the other two standing in the sky, and their eyes were filled with surprise. Qin Batian, Qin Feiyang, don't go too far. With a roar, the ancestral dragons rushed out from their respective clans. Once was fine, but a second time? Did they think that the dragons didn't exist? Lunatic. When he saw Lunatic, the dragon god was stunned. Then his face was filled with anger as he roared. You little bastard! How dare you come to Divine Dragon Island? Lunatic was stunned. Then he looked at the ancestral dragon and grinned. Isn't this master? This disciple pays his respects to you, senior. What? He called Lord Ancestral Dragon's master. Why didn't we know that Lord Ancestral Dragon had a disciple before? Everyone was surprised. But the ancestral dragon's face was extremely ugly, because when he looked at Lunatic, he remembered what happened in the Nether King's Hell. Master, don't be so cold. After all, we still have a master and disciple relationship. Lunatic smiled. The ancestral dragon's face was gloomy as he clenched his fists tightly, making cracking sounds. Swish! Above the dragon palace, the dragons, princess dragons, and prince also appeared. Looking at Qin Feiyang and the other two, the dragons and princess dragons had ugly expressions like the other ancestral dragons. The prince of the dragon clan frowned. Why is he going through a tribulation again? Could it be that he had broken through to the initial imperishable realm so quickly? Madman glanced at Dragon Island and took out his yin and yang ring. He threw it to Qin Feiyang and said, "Back off." With a wave of his hand, Qin Batian took Qin Feiyang and retreated like lightning. It's not Qin Feiyang's tribulation. Seeing Qin Feiyang retreat, everyone's eyes locked onto Madman. First, it was Qin Feiyang's tribulation. Now it's my tribulation. Are you envious? Madman looked down at the Divine Dragon Island and chuckled. Jealous? Everyone was stunned. He must be an idiot. Who would envy the heavenly tribulation? Ignorant. Don't you understand that only true monsters will have heavenly tribulations? In other words, Laozi and Qin Feiyang are such monsters. As for you dragons, you don't even have a single person who has transcended the tribulation. Needless to say, you're all useless trash. Madman laughed. You're courting death. The ancestral dragons were enraged. Not only did he come to transcend the tribulation twice, he even insulted the dragons. The dragons had been in the ancient world for countless years. When had anyone dared to provoke them so blatantly? What? You're not convinced? Come. Let me see you transcend the tribulation too. Madman looked at the 10 ancestral dragons with disdain. The 10 ancestral dragons clenched their fists, and their eyes spat fire. If looks could kill, Madman would have died many times over. Rumble. The heavenly tribulation in the sky was still brewing, and the power it emitted became more and more terrifying. Qin Feiyang said in surprise, "It doesn't seem to be any weaker than my heavenly tribulation?" Yes. Qin Batian nodded and frowned. But I don't understand. Why does he have a heavenly tribulation too? Qin Feiyang was also confused. Suddenly he thought of something and said, "Is it related to his evil power?" Evil power? Qin Batian was stunned. Yes. After senior brother Madman entered the Nether King's Hell, all his divine power turned into evil power. This might be the reason why he is transcending the tribulation. Qin Feiyang said in a deep voice. If that's the case, then his situation is definitely worse than yours, because evil power is not tolerated by heaven and earth. And the heavenly tribulation is the nemesis of evil power. Qin Batian said. Qin Feiyang heard this and suddenly shivered. That's right. The heavenly tribulation was the nemesis of evil. And senior brother Madman was almost the embodiment of evil power. Then wouldn't it be even more dangerous for him to face the heavenly tribulation? However, Madman didn't seem to realize the danger. Suddenly, His gaze fell on the sky above the dragon palace. He glanced at the dragons and Princess Longzun, then directly looked at the Prince Longzun and asked, "You are that prince?" "That's me." The Prince Long Dragons nodded. Madman said, "I heard from Qin Feiyang that you are very interested in this father?" "Interested in you?" The Prince Long Dragons was stunned. "This father also heard that your heavenly dragon domain is the same as this father's blood demon domain, able to cause the opponent's cultivation to drop by 5 small realms?" Madman said. A look of realization appeared in the eyes of the Prince Long Dragons as he asked, "You are the one called Madman?" "That's right, this father." Madman nodded. "So it's you." The Prince Long Dragons sized up Madman and laughed. "I am indeed very interested in you." Haha. Qin Feiyang really didn't lie to this father. You are indeed an exception in the dragons. Just you wait. After this father finishes his tribulation, I will properly train with you. Madman laughed, looked up at the sky and shouted, "Damn heavens, don't dawdle, come quickly." This guy is openly challenging the heavens? Damn. He is even more arrogant than Qin Feiyang. The dragons looked at each other. Crack. As if it really felt the provocation of Madman. Accompanied by a deafening sound, a blood-colored tribulation descended. The corner of Madman's mouth lifted as he looked at the black dragon ancestor dragon and laughed. "Master, please wait and see. This disciple will definitely make you proud." As soon as his words fell, boom, dazzling golden divine light roared out of his body. A monstrous might also shrouded all directions. This is a heaven-defying divine art. The Prince Long Dragon's pupils suddenly shrank. He didn't expect Madman to also have a heaven-defying divine art. The golden divine light roared in all directions, turning into a terrifying wave that shattered the sky as it blasted toward the tribulation. Boom! Under the shocked gazes of countless dragons, the tribulation was instantly shattered by the golden divine light. What the hell is this? It can even shatter the tribulation, isn't it too strong? The divine dragon island was in an uproar. Whether it was the dragons or the 1 million humans that surrendered to the dragons, they were all dumbfounded. This is a heaven-defying divine art. Wang Chong stood in the sky above the cultivation ground and looked at Madman in the sky as he muttered, "What? This person also has a heaven-defying divine art? Why haven't I heard of his name before?" Someone was surprised. "Not just you guys. Even us from the Northern Dragon God Palace don't know much about this person. We just know that he is with Qin Feiyang. Ever since he entered the Northern Dragon God Palace, he has only made a move once. At that time, there was a person called Gu Fan who relied on his supreme divine art to bring people to challenge Qin Feiyang. It was this madman who killed Gu Fan in one move. After that, that madman never appeared again. Thus there are very, very few records regarding him. But I didn't expect him to be so strong," someone said in disbelief. Looking at the way Madman and Qin Feiyang interact, they shouldn't have a superior and subordinate relationship. Yes, they must be friends. To be able to become Qin Feiyang's friend, needless to say, this person is definitely not simple. The people in the cultivation area were discussing animatedly, but the ancestral dragons knew Madman's methods, because even they had suffered a lot under Madman's hands back in Fallen Valley. After the heavenly tribulation dissipated, Madman laughed and looked down at the ancestral dragon. "Master, how was it? I didn't embarrass you, right?" "Yes. You are amazing. I am really proud of you." The ancestral dragon gritted his teeth and said word by word. "They are really master and disciple? What's going on?" Madman is Qin Feiyang's friend, and Qin Feiyang is the enemy of the dragons. How could the enemy of the dragons become the disciple of Lord Ancestral Dragon? Everyone was confused. Haha. Thank you for your praise, Master. This disciple will continue to work hard and live up to your expectations. Madman laughed loudly. Looking at the ancestral dragon's face that was getting uglier and uglier, he couldn't help but feel happy. Bastard. The ancestral dragon almost went crazy. If not for the dragon sovereign watching from above the dragon palace, he would have already killed his way out. Boom. Soon, the second heavenly tribulation descended. Madman stood proudly in the sky, his entire body emitting a dazzling golden light. When the second heavenly tribulation descended, the golden light suddenly formed a golden barrier. Boom! The heavenly tribulation struck the barrier, causing an apocalyptic shockwave to erupt, shattering the sky. However, the barrier didn't shatter. This daddy will also try using this heavenly tribulation to temper my body. The madman grinned, and a strand of lightning energy passed through the barrier, and was caught by the madman. Gotcha! When it came into contact with the lightning, madman's hand shattered on the spot, flesh and blood splattering everywhere. So strong! Madman was dumbfounded. Qin Feiyang's eyelids twitched as he hurriedly roared. Don't mess around. This is the heavenly tribulation, the nemesis of evil power. It will pose a fatal threat to you. He never would have thought that this guy would be so daring to come into contact with the heavenly tribulation at such a close distance. Wasn't this courting death? This daddy can't afford to lose face like this. Since you can do it, this daddy can definitely do it too. Madman pursed his lips, and then directly sucked that wisp of lightning into his body. Immediately, Madman's skin and flesh were torn open as blood flowed out. Although it was only a wisp of lightning, it was like 1,000 soldiers and horses, crazily destroying his body. Is it really this daddy's nemesis? No. This daddy is a madman. How can I have a nemesis? Madman roared. But the result was that he actually refined the lightning. His body was also obviously a little stronger. This guy. Qin Batian looked at this scene and shook his head. He could actually do such a crazy action. Sure enough, he was like his name, a complete madman. Alright, I'm convinced. Qin Feiyang couldn't help but shake his head and smile bitterly. There was really nothing this guy didn't dare to do. Chapter 2902. Sigh. How great would it be if he was really one of us dragons? The woman in white shook her head and sighed. From this child's performance, his future achievements would definitely not be lower than Qin Feiyang's. What did you say? Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon glared at her. The woman in white glanced at him and said with a faint smile, I'm just speaking from the bottom of my heart. Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon snorted and looked up at Madman, killing intent flashing in his eyes. He hated Madman to the bone. This kind of hatred was even more than his hatred for Qin Feiyang. But Madman just had to provoke him and said with a smile, Master, how is it? I didn't embarrass you, right? Looking at Madman's playful attitude, Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon really wanted to go crazy. Crack. At this time, the third heavenly tribulation descended. Quickly kill him. Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon roared in his heart. But it didn't go as he wished. The heavenly tribulation was blocked by the golden barrier again. You can't even kill such an ant, damn heavens. What use do you have? Seeing this, Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon felt indignant. Boom. Soon, the fourth heavenly tribulation descended. The power of this heavenly tribulation had also reached the initial imperishable realm. It seems that his heavenly tribulation is exactly the same as your heavenly tribulation. Qin Batian whispered. Hun. Qin Feiyang nodded. At that time, his fourth heavenly tribulation was also comparable to the initial imperishable realm. And now Madman was the same. Could it be that Madman's heavenly tribulation would also surpass the imperishable realm and reach the Dominator realm? However, facing this heavenly tribulation, Madman's eyes were like torches. Not only was he not afraid, he continued to use the power of thunder and lightning to temper his body. Although each tempering would make him suffer physical pain, he didn't frown, as if he didn't feel pain. The heaven-defying divine art was indeed heaven-defying, helping him block one heavenly tribulation after another. Boom! Suddenly, Madman's body also exploded with a dull sound, and his body soared to the peak level. Haha! Madman couldn't help but laugh. Qin Feiyang shook his head and smiled bitterly. The heavenly tribulation was originally the bane of evil, but now, the madman was doing the opposite, using the heavenly tribulation to temper his body. Furthermore, he had successfully tempered his body to the pinnacle level. What else could he say? He could only admire him. As expected, he is not simple. The Prince of Dragons mumbled. Princess Dragon said unhappily, Brother, why are you still praising him? Shouldn't I praise him? The Prince of Dragons asked. He's our enemy. Can you tell which side you're on? Princess Dragons pouted. Enemy. The Prince of the Dragons shook his head and smiled. Why are you shaking your head? Princess Dragons frowned. Little sister, let me tell you something. There are no eternal enemies in this world. And he and Qin Feiyang will sooner or later become members of our dragons. The Prince of Dragons laughed. Become members of our dragons? Princess Dragons was taken aback, then immediately looked at Long Zun and said, Mother, look at Big Brother, he's still talking in his sleep. Long Zun couldn't help but raise her brows. Sleep talking, the Prince of Dragons murmured. He didn't explain further, and continued to look at the madman. Not enough. This daddy's body also needs to reach the sovereign level. High up in the sky, the madman raised his head and laughed. Strands of lightning power continued to fuse into his body. Kacha. The fifth heavenly tribulation descended. The power of this heavenly tribulation was stronger than the fourth, the sixth, the seventh, the eighth, the ninth. When the ninth heavenly tribulation descended, the terrifying power could already be described as destroying the world. The madman raised his head and looked at the bloody heavenly tribulation, muttering, It's time to let you see my true strength. As soon as his voice fell, the madman suddenly raised his arm. The golden barrier collapsed, and then condensed into a 10-meter-long halberd. As if it was made of gold, golden light illuminated all directions. The madman grabbed the halberd and slashed at the heavenly tribulation. Boom! The heavenly tribulation was annihilated on the spot. The halberd was like a peerless divine weapon, blooming with dazzling light. The madman was like a god, pointing at the sky, overflowing with domineering aura. The 11th, 12th, 15th heavenly tribulation continued to descend. When facing the 20th heavenly tribulation, the madman began to struggle, because the power of the heavenly tribulation had already reached the peak imperishable realm. Boom! Facing the terrifying heavenly tribulation, the madman's situation became worse and worse. Every time a heavenly tribulation descended, he would suffer a fatal injury. When the 23rd heavenly tribulation descended, the halberd in the madman's hand shattered on the spot. The terrifying power of lightning instantly submerged him. Accompanied by a painful howl, the madman's body directly shattered. Not good. Qin Feiyang's expression changed greatly. He remembered that when the 23rd heavenly tribulation descended, his blood sword collapsed, his body shattered, and only his divine soul remained. At that time, if it wasn't for the sunset divine bow and other heaven-defying divine weapons protecting him, he wouldn't have been able to withstand it. Don't help me, the madman shouted. Clang! Accompanied by a loud sound, the blood demon tower rushed out. In an instant, a bloody light overflowed into the sky, protecting the madman. Fortunately, he has the blood demon tower. Qin Feiyang breathed a sigh of relief. Are you sure the blood demon tower alone is enough to protect him? Qin Batian said in a deep voice. One had to know that Qin Feiyang had the help of 18 heaven-defying divine weapons during his tribulation. But in the end, he still couldn't withstand it. If he hadn't comprehended the law of lightning at the critical moment, he would have died. Since he said that he doesn't need my help, then I believe that he can definitely do it. Qin Feiyang said. Boom! Another heavenly tribulation descended. The blood demon tower was very decisive. It directly rushed into the Star River with the madman's divine soul, entering a fully recovered state to resist the heavenly tribulation. Qin Batian also chased into the Star River with Qin Feiyang. The people of the dragons didn't follow this time, because Qin Feiyang was present. Qin Feiyang wasn't like Qin Batian. Before Qin Batian and the others did anything, they would first consider the consequences of their actions. But Qin Feiyang wouldn't. As long as there was a chance, he would make a move. And after so long, the sunset divine bow and other heaven-defying divine weapons might have been repaired. So once Qin Feiyang made a move against them, the consequences would be unimaginable. Boom! The heavenly tribulation descended crazily. The blood demon tower also entered a state of fragmentation step by step. The artifact's spirit said anxiously, Madman, I can't hold on for long. Give me a little more time. The madman whispered as he glanced at the heavenly tribulation. His previous frivolous attitude was gone, and he looked incomparably calm. What is he doing? Qin Batian was surprised. I don't know. Qin Feiyang shook his head. Suddenly, the madman actually closed his eyes, and there was no change in his expression. It was as if he wasn't transcending the tribulation, but was on vacation. Has he given up resisting? Qin Batian frowned. Giving up resisting? How is that possible? This isn't senior brother madman's character at all. Qin Feiyang said. Then what is he doing? Qin Batian was suspicious. Qin Feiyang also looked at the madman in confusion. Suddenly, he shuddered and said in surprise, This guy can't be thinking of fighting to survive, right? What do you mean? Qin Batian looked at him in a daze. Thunder Law. Qin Feiyang said word by word. What? He also wants to take the opportunity to comprehend the Thunder Law. Qin Batian was stunned. That's what he means. Qin Feiyang nodded. This guy. Qin Batian shook his head speechlessly. Was it so easy to comprehend the power of laws? Wasn't this treating one's life as a joke? You knew him earlier than me, so you should know him better than me. With his talent and comprehension, he might really be able to do it. Qin Feiyang's eyes were filled with anticipation. Qin Batian fell silent. Indeed, he knew the madman very early on, and their relationship back then was quite good, so he knew about the madman's situation. Whether it was the madman's talent or potential, he was one in a million. However, because of his foster father's death back then, he had been depressed. If not for this matter, the madman's achievements would not be lower than his. In other words, as long as the madman was serious, he would definitely be a very terrifying person. Thinking of this, Qin Batian's eyes couldn't help but look forward to it. Crack! Boom! The power of the heavenly tribulation became more and more terrifying. All of a sudden, the power increased to the half-step sovereign realm. The galaxy began to collapse. The situation of the Blood Demon Tower was getting worse and worse. Although it was a heaven-defying divine artifact, although it had entered a state of complete recovery, it was still the only heaven-defying divine artifact. Moreover, it was different from the Sunset Divine Bow and other heaven-defying divine artifacts. The Sunset Divine Bow and other heaven-defying divine artifacts had been cultivating in the land of origin for a long time, and had become stronger than before. But the Blood Demon Tower had not entered the land of origin. Its strength was still at the level of an ordinary heaven-defying divine artifact. Boom! When the power of the heavenly tribulation increased to the initial sovereign realm, the Blood Demon Tower finally couldn't withstand it and shattered into pieces. The dazzling divine light also dimmed. Boom! The heavenly tribulation was like a reaper, heading straight for the madman's divine soul. However, the madman didn't seem to notice, and still had his eyes closed. The madman himself wasn't anxious, but Qin Feiyang and Qin Batian, who were bystanders, were about to go crazy. Hurry! Qin Feiyang roared in his heart. Qin Batian said in a deep voice, Feiyang, quickly prepare to rescue him. Qin Feiyang nodded. If it really reached the point of life and death, he wouldn't sit back and do nothing. In the blink of an eye, the heavenly tribulation had already arrived. Qin Feiyang was about to make a move, but at this moment, the madman suddenly opened his eyes and two divine lights burst out. Following closely, in front of him, a wisp of blood-colored lightning flame appeared. The aura of the power of laws also spread out. This, Qin Feiyang was stunned. Qin Batian also looked at the wisp of lightning flame in shock. He actually did it. This guy is really a monster. Haha. The law of thunder, this is too simple. The madman looked at the lightning flame, and couldn't help but laugh proudly. Boom! At the same time, the heavenly tribulation blasted down, and drowned the madman. The nemesis of evil power, is it? Absorb for me. The madman's domineering voice sounded in the lightning. Following closely, an earth-shattering scene appeared. The lightning formed by the heavenly tribulation surged into the madman's body like a tide. As for the lightning, it didn't cause any harm to his fleshly body. Chapter 2903. Simple. Qin Feiyang and Qin Batian looked at each other. Fortunately, there was no one else here. Otherwise, if they heard this, they would probably die from anger. But there was nothing they could do. This guy did have the capital to be arrogant. Ancestor. Although he has mastered the law of thunder, and is no longer afraid of the heavenly tribulation, the divine power in his body is after all evil. Logically speaking, the heavenly tribulation should still have some restraints on him. But now, why does it not have any restraints at all? Qin Feiyang looked at Qin Batian suspiciously. This is the mystery of the law of thunder. When you comprehend the law of thunder, it is equivalent to breaking the shackles and no longer being restrained. In fact, your situation is similar to his. The murderous aura, and evil aura born in the slaughter domain are also not tolerated by heaven and earth. Qin Batian said. There is still a difference. Qin Feiyang said. There is definitely a difference. But the logic is the same. Qin Batian smiled. Qin Feiyang nodded. Boom. Next, the heavenly tribulation continued to fall, but it was all absorbed by the madman. The madman's body was also successfully tempered to the supreme level. When the 99th tribulation descended, a ray of auspicious light descended from the sky and merged into the madman's body. The madman's body immediately began to be reconstructed. He also officially stepped into the imperishable realm. At the same time, it also announced the end of the tribulation. Qin Feiyang stepped forward and shook his head helplessly. You don't want to lose to me at all. Of course. I have already lost to Qin Batian back then. If I lose to you now, how shameful would it be? The madman pursed his lips. Then you should be happy now. The law of thunder, the law of slaughter, plus the law of thunder you obtained in the temple. You have mastered 3 kinds of law of thunder. Qin Feiyang shook his head. The madman smiled and said, Actually, I have to thank you. Thank me. Qin Feiyang was stunned. Yeah, it's because I saw you comprehend the law of lightning with my own eyes, and received quite a bit of inspiration. That's why I can comprehend the law of lightning so easily now. Madman nodded. Even if it's because of Feiyang's revelation, it's still very impressive. After all, there were so many people watching back then. Yet other than you, no one else managed to comprehend the law of lightning. Qin Batian shook his head. How can they be the same as me? I'm a genius. Madman smiled proudly. Qin Feiyang and Qin Batian looked at each other helplessly. Would it kill you to keep a low profile? A few days later, Madman's body was reconstructed. Qin Feiyang returned the universe ring to Madman and said with a smile, Do you want to go to Divine Dragon Island again? That's exactly what I was thinking. Madman grinned. Qin Batian frowned. He looked at the two of them and said, Can't the two of you stop? I'm not very cultured. How do you spell the word quiet? Madman asked in return. Qin Batian was speechless. Ancestor, don't worry. We know what we're doing. Qin Feiyang smiled and sent Qin Batian to the castle. Then, the two of them left the Star River and rushed towards Divine Dragon Island below. A few days later, the dragons had already calmed down. I'm here again. The madman laughed maniacally, stirring up the calm Divine Dragon Island again. Are you done? A half-step undying Divine Dragon ran out and roared. What can you do to us if we're not done? Madman looked at him provocatively. You! The Divine Dragon gnashed his teeth in anger. Ancestral Dragon appeared and said in a deep voice, I advise you not to provoke us again. Provoke? Madman was stunned and sighed. Master, what are you saying? I'm your disciple. I respect you more than anything. Why would I provoke you? Ancestral Dragon roared. If you really respect me, then scram immediately. Every time he heard the word master, he felt a great humiliation. How unpleasant is the word scram. Since we're master and disciple, we should be intimate. Madman said. Scram. Ancestral Dragon was furious. Madman shook his head and said, You're making me sad. I'm going to kill you. Ancestral Dragon could no longer hold back the monstrous anger in his heart. He charged towards the barrier and Madman. I'm waiting for you to come out. Madman immediately revealed a cold smile. Golden light burst out, and the halberd appeared. Old Black, come back. The other ancestral dragons heard the commotion and ran out from their respective clans. Seeing this scene, their expressions changed and they roared. However, it was too late. Madman's eyes flashed with killing intent. He grabbed the halberd and charged towards Ancestral Dragon. You think you can overturn the heavens with a heaven-defying divine artifact? Ancestral Dragon was also blinded by anger. He shook his body and turned into a huge black dragon. This was his main body. So what if I turn back to my main body? Madman's face was full of disdain. The halberd shattered the sky and slashed at the black dragon's huge tail. Clang! Accompanied by dazzling sparks, the dragon's scales shattered on the spot, and the huge tail fell. The dragon blood immediately poured out like a waterfall. Roar! The black dragon Ancestral Dragon howled in pain. Ancestral Dragon's dragon meat is a great tonic, if used to make soup. Qin Feiyong chuckled and stepped forward to grab Ancestral Dragon's huge tail and put it into the black tortoise realm. You deserve to die, deserve to die. Ancestral Dragon roared again and again. It's you who deserves to die. In the Nether King's hell, you actually wanted to use me to enter the Fallen Valley. Look at who I am. Do you think I'm someone you can use? Madman's body was filled with hostility. He raised the halberd and charged towards Ancestral Dragon's head. However, at this moment, the power of a divine dragon shot out from the dragon palace and blasted towards the heavenly halberd. Boom! Madman was sent flying on the spot. At the same time, Qin Feiyong turned his gaze and looked down at the dragon palace. He saw Dragon Sovereign standing above the dragon palace, emitting a bone-chilling cold current. Come back! Dragon Sovereign looked at Ancestral Dragon from afar and said coldly. But Ancestral Dragon's face was filled with unwillingness. Dragon Sovereign said expressionlessly, I don't want to say it a second time. Ancestral Dragon's eyes trembled. He looked gloomily at Madman and Qin Feiyong before flying towards the Divine Dragon Island below. If you want to leave, you have to get my permission. Qin Feiyong executed the walk formula, and with a single step, the blood sword appeared. Its sharpness swept out in all directions, slashing towards the Ancestral Dragon. You're courting death. Dragon Sovereign enunciated each word as killing intent burst out. Shwa. The next moment, Dragon Sovereign appeared in front of Ancestral Dragon and waved his hand. The void shattered, and a space-time black hole appeared. Space-time law, profound divine ability. Qin Feiyong immediately felt a powerful suction force that crazily pulled him into the space-time black hole. Profound divine ability can't stop me. Qin Feiyong stared at Dragon Sovereign. Battle intent surged as he slashed at the space-time black hole. Boom! An earth-shattering explosion immediately erupted in the area. The space-time black hole collapsed, but the blood sword in Qin Feiyong's hand was also shattered. A profound divine ability comparable to a heaven-defying divine ability is indeed powerful. Qin Feiyong looked up at Dragon Sovereign. His eyes were as sharp as a blade. Dragon Sovereign's pupils shrank. This kill word technique is already strong enough to be comparable to a profound divine ability? One has to know. This kill word technique wasn't the real kill word technique. The real kill word technique was the slaughter domain. If Qin Feiyong activated the slaughter domain, only a sovereign divine weapon would be able to block it. Hehe. Lord Dragon Sovereign's name has always been like thunder to my ears. Madman, who had been sent flying, flew over and stared at Long Zun with a grin. This sovereign doesn't have the energy to waste words with you. If you have the ability, then kill your way into the Divine Dragon Island. After Dragon Sovereign finished speaking, he turned around and entered the barrier with Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon without looking back. Qin Feiyong and Madman looked at each other. Looking at Dragon Sovereign's back, they couldn't help but frown. Looking at this posture, Dragon Sovereign didn't intend to fight them head-on at all. With the Ice Dragon's barrier, they really couldn't force their way in. Inside the barrier, Dragon Sovereign looked at Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon and said solemnly, "Listen to this sovereign. In the future, without this sovereign's permission, if you dare to leave the barrier again, this sovereign will personally kill you." Yes. Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon's body trembled. He quickly bowed and responded, "Useless thing." Dragon Sovereign snorted coldly and disappeared from the Dragon Palace. Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon looked up at Qin Feiyong and Madman with resentment. He also turned around and disappeared from the clan. Qin Feiyong, looking at them, they planned to hide inside. "What do you think we should do?" Madman frowned. It wasn't easy to lure Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon out of the barrier, but Dragon Sovereign disrupted it. This is really not easy. Qin Feiyang shook his head. Madman's eyes suddenly lit up. How about we lure Prince Dragons out? Lure him out? Qin Feiyang was stunned. The Prince of the Dragon Clan is Long Zun's precious treasure. As long as we kill Prince Dragons, Dragon Sovereign will definitely go crazy with anger. At that time, he will naturally bring people out and start a full-scale war with us. Madman smiled slyly. Qin Feiyang laughed involuntarily. He nodded and said, "That's a good idea. However, given the Dragon Clan's prince's personality, if he is unwilling, he will not come out no matter what method you use." Are you that sure? Madman was stunned. Yes. Qin Feiyang nodded. If you don't believe me, you can try. Let's try. Madman looked at Dragon Palace and shouted, "That dog shit prince. I have already finished my tribulation. Come, let's compete." Qin Feiyang shook his head speechlessly. He really did such a childish thing. He ignored Madman and lowered his head to ponder. Sure enough, it was as Qin Feiyang expected. Prince Dragons wasn't provoked, and Dragon Palace was extremely quiet. I heard Qin Feiyang say that you are very powerful. Why don't you dare to accept the challenge now? Don't be a coward. Madman roared, his voice echoing over the entire Divine Dragon Island for a long time. Preposterous. How dare you humiliate His Highness like this? This bastard. Sooner or later I will pull out his tendons and skin him. Prince Dragons didn't have any reaction, but the other Divine Dragons were enraged. Sigh. Seems like you are just like that. Prince, I think you are just a good-for-nothing. You can hide in there forever. Madman ridiculed, but no matter how ugly his words were, Prince Dragons didn't reply to him. It was as if he didn't hear anything. Chapter 2904. He's really able to keep his composure. Frenzy rubbed his throat. His throat was hoarse from all the shouting, but he didn't make a sound. I already said it's useless, I don't believe it. Qin Feiyang glanced at him. How would I know that he's such a calm person? Frenzy was helpless. Qin Feiyang said, his mental state is not something you can imagine. Then you have to think of an idea. Don't wait for Long Zun to step into the Dominator realm. Look, it's already so difficult to deal with them now. If Long Zun steps into the Dominator realm, there will definitely be no hope. Frenzy said, not only will there be no hope, but the entire ancient world, including the North Region, East Tomb, West Desert, and South Desolate Mountain, will also be plunged into misery and suffering. Qin Feiyang said, it's good that you know. When the time comes, the dragon race will definitely wash the ancient realm with blood. There will be a great shuffle. Frenzy said. However, Long Zun's spacetime law is only at the 4th stage. We still have a lot of time to prepare. Qin Feiyang said. Don't think about this. The sooner we get rid of this old witch, the better. Frenzy said. Phew. Qin Feiyang took a deep breath and transmitted his voice. Fire Lotus. Ask that brat if the various heaven-defying artifacts have been restored. Okay. Fire Lotus responded. After a while she said, it's been restored. Very good. Let them out. Qin Feiyang's eyes flashed. Soon. Boom. Accompanied by a terrifying aura, 18 heaven-defying artifacts appeared in unison. Below, the dragons on Divine Dragon Island that had just calmed down fell into an uproar again. He took out all the heaven-defying artifacts. What is he planning to do? Everyone ran out and stared at the 18 heaven-defying artifacts, including the sunset bow. Damn it. There's no end to it. Do you really think that we dragons are easy to bully? The 10 ancestral dragons came out with angry faces. I'm bullying you now, so what? When you bullied us in the past, I didn't see you restrain yourself. Madman sneered. The 10 ancestral dragons had gloomy faces, but the Dragon Palace didn't have any reaction. The revered dragon, the Prince of the Dragons, and the Princess of the Dragons did not appear. The Dragon Sovereign didn't say anything. Even though the 10 great ancestral dragons were burning with rage, they could only stare helplessly. Feiyang, are you thinking of reviving these heaven-defying divine artifacts and forcefully breaking the barrier? Qin Baishan's voice suddenly sounded in Qin Feiyang's mind. We should at least try. Qin Feiyang thought. Calm down first. Even if you want to do that, You have to let the creatures of the divine prefecture leave first. Qin Batian said. Where are we going? Qin Feiyang asked. Black Tortoise World, Qin Batian said. No, the Black Tortoise World can't hold so many people. Moreover, once these people appear in the Black Tortoise World, they will definitely disrupt the order of the Black Tortoise World. Qin Feiyang decisively rejected. Then other than the Black Tortoise World, where else can they go? Qin Batian frowned. Qin Feiyang pondered for a moment and said, I do have a place in mind, the Four Regions. The Four Regions, Qin Batian remained silent. Now that the dragons are trapped on the Divine Dragon Island, they can't interfere with the entrance of the Four Regions. So we can temporarily transfer the people of the Divine Prefecture to the Four Regions. Qin Feiyang said. That works too. Qin Batian nodded and said, Then come in first, we'll discuss it. All right. Qin Feiyang responded and turned to look at Madman. Madman said, What are you looking at me for? Hurry up and do it. Let's not do it for now. Qin Feiyang shook his head and brought Madman and the various heaven-defying divine artifacts into the Black Tortoise World. And Qin Batian was in front of the ancient castle at this moment. Qin Feiyang stepped in front of Qin Batian and frowned. If we really want to transfer to the Four Regions, I'm afraid it will take a lot of time, Qin Batian said. So I'm going to mobilize all 108 generals. Wait, what do you mean? Madman hurriedly interrupted the two and asked suspiciously. Qin Feiyang said, Just in case, we're going to transfer the people of the Divine Prefecture to the Four Regions before the war starts. Transfer all of them to the Four Regions? Madman was astonished. That's a huge project. So we need a lot of manpower. After Qin Feiyang said that, he turned to Qin Batian and said, Then I'll leave this matter to the Dragon Slayer Palace. Okay. Qin Batian nodded. Qin Feiyang continued. And the resources of the Divine Prefecture, such as the crystal veins and the soul line, have to be taken away as well. That's a must. If these resources are destroyed, then even if the dragons are destroyed by us, the Divine Prefecture will eventually become a place lacking in essence qi. At that time, no one will be willing to return to the Divine Prefecture. Although the Four Regions are vast, they can't accommodate so many creatures. Qin Batian said. Qin Feiyang said with a smile, Then let's do it. Okay. Qin Batian nodded. Qin Feiyang waved his hand and brought Qin Batian to Zhongzhou. 108 generals, assemble quickly. As the sound of Qin Batian's voice faded, 108 figures shot out from all directions. Now these divine generals were all powerful masters in the phenomenal undead realm. However, even if their cultivation had become stronger, they were still respectful to Qin Batian as usual. After all, not only was Qin Batian powerful, but he also had Qin Feiyang as a powerful backer. That's right. In the past, in everyone's eyes, Qin Batian was Qin Feiyang's backer. But now with the rise of Qin Feiyang, the position had quietly changed. Now Qin Feiyang was Qin Batian's backer. I have a task for you. Go out immediately and go to the west, north, south, and east separately. Transfer all the creatures in the Divine Prefecture to the Four Regions. Qin Batian said. Yes. The 108 generals didn't ask why. What they had to do was to carry out the order. Go out. Qin Batian turned to Qin Feiyang and said. Qin Feiyang nodded with a smile. With a wave of his hand, he appeared above the Divine Dragon Island with Qin Feiyang and the 108 generals. Aren't they the 108 generals of the dragon-slaying palace? What are they doing here? The dragons were shocked. First 18 heaven-defying divine artifacts appeared, and now, these 108 generals. What was Qin Feiyang going to do? Don't delay. Qin Feiyang warned as he looked at the 108 generals. Okay. The 108 generals nodded. Qin Batian waved his hand and opened 4 time and space transportation channels. He smiled and said, Go. After completing the task, we will meet at the north coast. Yes. The 108 generals immediately divided into 4 groups and entered the time and space transportation channels. Looking at the backs of the 108 generals, the white-clothed woman's pupils suddenly shrank. She said, Look at their cultivation. Have they all reached the greater undead stage? The other ancestral dragons looked, and a trace of disbelief crept up their faces. As expected, these 108 people had already stepped into the great success, imperishable stage. It seems that the time array of the Black Tortoise realm is not as simple as we thought. The Blood Dragon ancestral dragon said. The situation is getting worse for us dragons. The white-clothed woman sighed. After the 108 generals left, Qin Feiyang pondered for a while. He looked at Qin Batian and said, Ancestor, I will go to the Holy Dragon City first. Holy Dragon City? Qin Batian was stunned. A trace of a smile crept up his eyes. He said, You are going to see Shangguan Qiu, right? Qin Feiyang said helplessly, Ancestor, can you not smile so strangely? Really? Qin Batian laughed. Even a fool can see it. Qin Feiyang rolled his eyes. Qin Batian shook his head and smiled. He said, I have heard about Shangguan Qiu and your situation. I also specially investigated this girl. She is indeed a good girl. And then, Qin Feiyang said with a dark face, he even secretly investigated Shangguan Qiu. What was he trying to do? Don't be so dull. It is your blessing that such a good girl likes you. Qin Batian said. What about you? Didn't you meet any women you like in the ancient realm? Qin Feiyang said. Me. Qin Batian was stunned. He said, I am already so old. How can I have the energy to think about this? So you do have this idea but you are powerless? Ancestor, you are finished. When I return to the Black Tortoise realm, I will tell my great-grandmother. Qin Feiyang said with a sneaky smile. Go away. Qin Batian glared at Qin Feiyang and said, Don't do anything rash. You know your great-grandmother's temper. If she hears this, how can I live in peace in the future? Haha. Ancestor, you are also a henpecked husband. Qin Feiyang laughed. What henpecked husband? This is respect. Qin Batian glared at Qin Feiyang. Then you have to suck up to me. Otherwise one day, I will accidentally spill the beans. Qin Feiyang smiled slyly. Brat, are you looking for a beating? Qin Batian's face darkened. How dare you threaten me? You are asking for a beating. Hee. Qin Feiyang grinned. Holy Dragon City. With the arrival of the divine generals, the entire Holy Dragon City was in chaos. They want us to move to the northern region? Are you kidding me? The divine land is my home. I would rather die than leave. Me too. I don't want to leave my home. Many people were somewhat resistant to the idea of moving. What do you know? This is for your own good. Our battle with the dragons is about to begin. Do you want to stay here and wait for death? Jiang Dafei stood beside a group of divine generals and said angrily, as the city lord of the Holy Dragon City, it was naturally his duty to move. But we don't have to go to the four regions. We can temporarily retreat to the North Sea and come back when the battle is over. That's right. The northern region is so far away from the Divine Dragon Island. Even if you revive the heaven-defying divine artifact, you won't be affected. Everyone spoke one after another. What if the battle spreads to the North Sea? Suddenly, a cold voice sounded. Then two figures appeared. It was Qin Feiyang and Qin Batian. Young lord. Jiang Dafei hurried over and said with a worried face, These people don't want to move. Qin Feiyang, can you understand us? After all, we are all born and raised in the divine land. If you ask us to leave now, isn't it the same as asking us to abandon everything? Seeing Qin Feiyang appear, the people in the city below hurriedly said, I understand the reluctance and pain of leaving your home, but there's no other way now. You have to leave. Otherwise, once the battle spreads to the entire divine land, it will be too late for you to leave. Qin Feiyang said. But everyone wanted to say something. No buts. This decision is for your own good. And I promise you that when the battle with the dragons is over, I will immediately send someone to pick you up. Of course, if you insist on not leaving, then I won't force you. But when the battle starts, don't expect us to care about your life and death. Because by then, I'm afraid we can't even protect ourselves. Think carefully. And those who decide to move, pack up your belongings immediately. After Qin Feiyang finished speaking, he ignored those people and flew toward the treasure pavilion. And students, I also hope you can make progress in your studies. I also want to thank everyone for your support in the past year. Thank you. In addition, I hope everyone can take good care of themselves in the recent pneumonia epidemic, especially the friends in Wuhan. You must take good care of yourselves and your families. Finally, there will be no more updates at night. The time for tomorrow's update will still be 8 o'clock in the evening. Chapter 2905. In front of the treasure school, Sheng Guanqiu stood at the door, looking at the chaotic crowd on the street. Chief Steward, what should we do? A guard next to him looked at Sheng Guanqiu and asked in a panic. Why are you panicking? Sheng Guanqiu glared at him, then looked up at Qin Feiyang. Whoosh! Qin Feiyang landed in front of Sheng Guanqiu and smiled at her. Greetings, young Master Qin. A group of guards and staff members bowed to salute. Qin Feiyang nodded. Sheng Guanqiu looked at Qin Feiyang and said, Is it your idea to move? Yes. Qin Feiyang nodded. Sheng Guanqiu's heart skipped a beat. She said, So the battle between us and the dragons is really about to break out? Yes. I was going to do it. But the ancestors took the creatures of the divine land into consideration. So we discussed and decided to move the creatures of the divine land to the 4 domains first. Qin Feiyang said. I have to go too? Sheng Guanqiu asked. Of course. Qin Feiyang smiled. But, Sheng Guanqiu furrowed her beautiful brows. What? Still reluctant to leave the divine land? Qin Feiyang smiled. Silly boy. She's not reluctant to leave the divine land. She's reluctant to leave you. Qin Batian stood in the air and looked at Qin Feiyang, who was like a block of wood, and could not help but mumble to himself. Sheng Guanqiu heard this, and looked at Qin Feiyang with a pair of resentful eyes. What's with that look? I don't think I've bullied you. Qin Feiyang was suspicious. Sheng Guanqiu could not help but roll her eyes. What an idiot. She said, Yes, I'm reluctant to leave the divine land. We've just settled down, and now we have to move. It doesn't matter. When the battle is over, you can come back if you want. And by then, you'll be the chief steward of the treasure school. Qin Feiyang smiled. The chief steward of the treasure school, Sheng Guanqiu murmured. In fact, what she cared about was not the chief steward of the treasure school at all. She just wanted to stay in Shenzhou and look at this man a few more times. Pack up and return to the northern region first. Come back when everything is over. Qin Feiyang smiled. All right. Sheng Guanqiu nodded and plucked up his courage. He looked at Qin Feiyang and asked, Can I hug you? That's not a good idea. Men and women shouldn't touch each other. Qin Feiyang smiled awkwardly. Can you not be so old-fashioned? Just treat it as a farewell between friends. Sheng Guanqiu stretched out his hands. Qin Feiyang shook his head and smiled. He raised his arm and pulled Sheng Guanqiu into his arms. With the beauty in his arms, her fragrance assaulted his nostrils. But even so, he didn't have any improper thoughts in his heart. It wasn't that he didn't understand. He just didn't want this to continue. As for Sheng Guanqiu, they could be friends or confidants, but there was absolutely no romantic relationship between them. Sheng Guanqiu didn't know what Qin Feiyang was thinking, and she didn't want to know. She just wanted to enjoy the happiness of being hugged by someone she loved. She buried her head deep into Qin Feiyang's chest. She wanted to imprint this moment in the depths of her soul forever. She wanted this moment to be eternal, but she also knew that it was impossible. She whispered, The battle with the dragons is extremely difficult. You must be careful and try to survive. Okay. Qin Feiyang nodded. Sheng Guanqiu raised her head and looked at Qin Feiyang. She smiled and said, As long as you survive, I won't pester you in the future. You little girl. Qin Feiyang reached out and rubbed Sheng Guanqiu's head. He couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. But Sheng Guanqiu was a little disappointed by his love, because she could feel that Qin Feiyang's love for her was not the love of a man for a woman, but the love of a brother for a sister. Maybe this is good. She comforted herself in her heart. Then she decisively left Qin Feiyang's arms and turned to look at the guards and staff of the treasure pavilion. Tell them to get ready to move the treasure pavilions in the major cities of the divine land. And listen to the arrangements of the immortal general of the dragon-slaying temple during the transfer process. With Shangguanqiu's order, the entire treasure pavilions of the Divine Land began to get busy. Seeing that the treasure pavilions were preparing to move, the others didn't dare to hesitate and began to pack their belongings. In the blink of an eye, 2 months passed. Qin Feiyang had been staying in the north the entire time. He personally watched as the cities turned into empty cities. He also saw the reluctance in the eyes of those who left. He knew better than anyone how it felt to leave one's home. He didn't want anyone to leave the Divine Land. But this was a choice he had to make. The creatures of the Divine Land must leave. Qin Feiyang released his divine thought, which spread out in all directions. Not only were the cities empty, but there were also no fierce beasts in the mountains outside the cities. He couldn't sense the aura of the spirit vein and crystal vein at all. Now he had nothing to worry about. Whoosh! Another 2 months passed. In the sky above the Holy Dragon City, the 108 generals returned. Is everything arranged? Qin Feiyang asked. Yes. The 108 generals nodded. Qin Feiyang took a deep breath. With a wave of his hand, the 108 generals disappeared and Lunatic appeared. He had been busy for a total of 4 months. 4 months outside was 120,000 years in the Black Tortoise realm. Lunatic's cultivation had already stabilized. And during this time, he had been comprehending the power of law. How's your comprehension of the power of law? Qin Feiyang asked with a smile. You'll know when the time comes. Lunatic smiled mysteriously, still keeping me in suspense. Qin Feiyang was speechless. Don't be long-winded. Let's go. I've been waiting impatiently for a long time. Lunatic looked at the inland sea, his eyes flashing with a shocking cold light. Qin Feiyang smiled faintly and opened an altar. Inland sea. The Mermaid Emperor was guarding the coast as usual. The broken sword floated in the sky, emitting a dazzling divine light. Whoosh! When Qin Feiyang and Lunatic arrived, the Mermaid Emperor opened his eyes and asked, Is everything arranged? Yes. Qin Feiyang nodded. Phew. The Mermaid Emperor let out a long breath. He stood up and looked in the direction of the Divine Dragon Island. I've been waiting for this moment for a long time, Qin Feiyang said. But this is also the most difficult battle. We have to face it, right? The Mermaid Emperor smiled. That's true. Qin Feiyang nodded. Then what's next? The Mermaid Emperor asked. Next, send a message to the Black Wing Emperor and the others. Head to the West Sea, North Sea, East Sea, and South Sea respectively. Anyone who tries to enter the 4 regions will be killed without mercy. Qin Feiyang's body emitted a shocking murderous aura. He wasn't very worried about other things. The only thing he was worried about was that the dragons would be desperate and send people to the 4 regions to kill the innocent. Then what about here? The Mermaid Emperor frowned. We're here, Qin Feiyang said. All right then. The Mermaid Emperor nodded. Let's go. Qin Feiyang waved his hand and stepped into the inner sea with Lunatic. They walked step by step toward the Divine Dragon Island. You must win. The Mermaid Emperor roared. We'll do our best. Qin Feiyang smiled without turning his head. They must win. To be honest, whether it was Qin Feiyang or Lunatic, they didn't have the confidence. After all, the dragons had a sovereign divine weapon. This was an insurmountable mountain, but they would do their best. For the ancient world, for the billions of living beings, and for themselves, because if the dragons weren't eliminated, they would never have a day of peace. The current Divine Dragon Island was unusually quiet. Whether it was the various ancestral dragons, or those who relied on the dragons, they were all cultivating with all their might. Boom! Suddenly, 2 auras rolled over. Terrifying murderous auras covered all directions. It was as if 2 death gods were approaching the Divine Dragon Island. And the dragons were alarmed. The patriarchs of the various dragons rushed out from their clans and looked towards the source of the aura. Gradually, 2 figures approached from afar and entered their line of sight. It's Qin Feiyang. Lunatic. What are they doing here again? The patriarchs of the various clans were furious. Every few days, they would come to the Divine Dragon Island for a stroll. Did they really think that this was their back garden that they could come and go as they pleased? When had the dragons suffered such a cowardly attitude? In front of them, not to mention coming to the Divine Dragon Island, No one even had the guts to enter the inner sea. Do you think it's fun? When Qin Feiyang and Lunatic arrived above the Divine Dragon Island, the Black Dragon's patriarch immediately roared. Play! Qin Feiyang and Lunatic were stunned. The Black Dragons shouted. Coming to the Divine Dragon Island every few days. I want to ask you, what exactly do you want to do? The Divine Dragon Island is now equivalent to our back garden. We can come and go as we please. What can you do? Lunatic's face was full of disdain. You. The patriarchs of the various clans glared. Qin Feiyang looked at the Black Dragon's patriarch and said with a smile, Our grudges are not shallow. I remember when I first came to Divine Land, I was intercepted by you. So what? The Black Dragon sneered. So what? I just want to ask you, do you have the guts to come out and fight with me? Qin Feiyang said lightly. Do you think I'm stupid? The Black Dragon sneered. Lunatic said contemptuously. If you don't have the guts, just say it. Why are you still looking for excuses? You. The Black Dragons gritted his teeth and stared at Lunatic. Come out and fight with me. I won't use any heaven-defying divine arts or heaven-defying divine artifacts. As long as you can beat me, I'll be at your disposal. Qin Feiyang said lightly. No heaven-defying divine arts or heaven-defying divine artifacts. The Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon was stunned. That's right. I, Qin Feiyang, have always been a man of my words. If I say it, I will definitely do it. If you still don't have the guts to come out, then I really have to look at you dragons in a different light. Qin Feiyang said. Are you sure? The Black Dragon Ancestor Dragon said solemnly. I'm sure. And I won't use the 3,000 incarnations, nor will I open the eye of heaven. Qin Feiyang said. This? The Black Dragon's patriarch was a little tempted. As everyone knew, Qin Feiyang's strongest means were the heaven-defying divine artifacts, the eye of heaven, and the 3,000 incarnations. If he really didn't use these means, then he was equivalent to a poisonous snake without fangs. Nothing to worry about at all. Don't be rash, this is definitely a trap. Seeing this, the other patriarchs hurriedly tried to persuade him. The Black Dragon's patriarch's heart trembled when he heard this. This person was famous for being cunning. If he really ran out, he might immediately use the heaven-defying divine artifact to kill him. Don't think of me as despicable as you. I'll do what I say. I'm just asking if you dare. After Qin Feiyang finished speaking, he looked at the other patriarchs and said, You can also come out and fight with me. As long as I lose, you can do whatever you want with me. Chapter 2906. The various patriarchs looked at each other. In the end, no one accepted the challenge. The dignified dragons, and the patriarchs of various clans, actually have no one to accept the challenge. You guys really make me look at you in a different light. May I ask, what qualifications do you have to rule the ancient realm? Qin Feiyang shouted. Don't be presumptuous. The Black Dragons roared. Then come out and use your strength to shut me up. Qin Feiyang shouted. When the Black Dragons heard this, they went silent again. In the face of such an unbridled provocation, who wouldn't be angry? It could be said that the patriarchs were so angry that their lungs were about to explode. But the other party was Qin Feiyang. Just hearing the name Qin Feiyang, they couldn't help but shudder, let alone fighting. All of you scram back to cultivate. Suddenly, Long Zun's shout resounded in the Dragon Palace. When the patriarchs heard this, their faces immediately changed, as they hurriedly flew back to their respective clans. Haha! I really didn't expect that even Long Zun would be so cowardly. Madman laughed loudly. The golden dragons immediately stopped in the air and said angrily, Little brat, don't be presumptuous. Isn't that so? The dignified #1 expert of the ancient realm, the ruler of the dragons, doesn't even dare to accept our provocation. What a joke. Madman sneered. Lord Long Zun, please allow me to go out and fight with them. The golden dragons was an old man wearing a golden robe. He looked at the dragon palace and roared. That's right. If we don't let them continue to be so presumptuous, if we don't let them, where will our dignity be? The other patriarchs also opened their mouths, filled with anger. Dignity? After holing up in the Divine Dragon Island for so long, do you think you still have dignity? Your dignity has long been thrown away by you and fed to the dogs. No, dogs don't like to eat it. Madman chuckled. Bastard, bastard. The patriarchs were furious, kneeling in the air. Looking at the dragon palace, they roared, Lord Long Zun, we request to battle. Dragon Palace was quiet. Long Zun hadn't shown herself from beginning to end, so no one knew what she was thinking. Lord Dragon Sovereign. The various clan leaders roared furiously. All right. Long Zun's voice finally rang out. Following closely, an invisible force descended, and the patriarchs felt their bodies lighten, and they immediately appeared outside the boundary. Haha. At least you have some backbone. Madman looked at the 10 people and laughed. The dragons had a total of 10 clans, so the number of clan leaders was the same as the ancestral dragon 10. Let's see how long you can be arrogant. The black dragons laughed sinisterly. The golden dragons looked at Qin Feiyang and said, Didn't we agree not to use heaven-defying divine items? 3,000 incarnations and the eye of heaven. Of course. Qin Feiyang nodded. I'll kill you first. The golden dragon ancestral dragon took a step forward, and his dragon might roared in all directions. Like a flood he pounced on Qin Feiyang. Feiyang, the various clan leaders are all at the small success undead stage. You can't be careless. Yi Zhong's voice suddenly rang in Qin Feiyang's mind. Obviously, everyone was inside the Black Tortoise realm, paying attention to the situation outside. Small success undead stage, Qin Feiyang murmured. Half-step undead stage, and small success undead stage were only 2 small realms apart. Moreover, although his cultivation was not as good as the patriarch of the dragons, one had to know that his physical strength had already reached the sovereign level. Boom! Simple and violent. He directly punched out, and the dragon might of the golden dragons was annihilated on the spot. Following closely, Qin Feiyang took a step forward, landed in front of the golden dragons and punched out. You don't even open your divine arts. Who are you looking down on? The golden dragons roared and fiercely slapped out with his palm. Boom! The fist and palm met in an instant. With a crack, the arm of the golden dragons shattered on the spot, flesh and blood splattering everywhere. This scene stunned the golden dragons. The other 9 patriarchs were also shocked. They knew that this person's physical body was very strong, but they didn't expect it to be strong to this extent. How long has it been? And you actually forgot that my physical body was tempered by the heavenly tribulation. Qin Feiyang looked at the golden dragons with ridicule. Of course I remember, but didn't I just reach the pinnacle stage at that time? The golden dragons shouted. Pinnacle stage? Qin Feiyang was slightly stunned, then patted his head and shook his head. Look at my memory. When he was going through the tribulation above the divine dragon island, his physical strength had indeed only reached the pinnacle stage. So, this was something that everyone knew. But what everyone didn't know was that after he went through the tribulation in the Star River, he used the heavenly tribulation to temper his physical body, increasing the strength of his physical body to the sovereign level. Regarding this point, even the dragon sovereign, the ancestral dragons, and the princes didn't know, because at that time, they had already left the Star River and returned to the divine dragon island. In other words, whether it was him, Frenzy, or the dragons, none of them knew that their physical body had already been upgraded to the sovereign level. Because when Frenzy went to the Star River to go through the tribulation, none of the dragons followed to watch. In that case, the strength of the physical body could also be used as an unexpected trump card. Thinking of this, Qin Feiyang's eyes became playful. Boom! He took another step forward, and a monstrous divine power erupted from under his feet. Heavenly Dragon's 9 steps. Sovereign-level divine technique. His speed suddenly skyrocketed. You're not the only one who has a sovereign-level auxiliary divine technique. The patriarch of the Golden Dragon race shouted, and also used a kind of mysterious footwork. His speed was even faster than Qin Feiyang's. In an instant he circled behind Qin Feiyang. He raised his other hand and slapped towards Qin Feiyang's back. After all, his cultivation was 2 small realms higher than Qin Feiyang, and the speed of the Heavenly Dragon's 9 steps naturally couldn't keep up with him. But Qin Feiyang didn't panic in the slightest. Just as the palm of the golden dragons was about to hit his back, Qin Feiyang suddenly turned around and directly punched out. The terrifying power was suddenly like a torrent that had opened a gate and fiercely poured out. And this time he went all out and didn't hold back at all. Compared to the previous punch, it was several times stronger. Ah! Immediately, accompanied by a scream, the other arm of the golden dragon shattered on the spot, and blood stained the sky. His entire body was sent flying like a meteor. Even his body was covered in cracks from the impact of this power. It can't be so strong. The 9 people of the Black Dragons looked at this scene, and their faces were full of shock. Seriously injuring the golden dragons with one punch? How terrifying was this power? Just this little ability? If it is, then I really look down on you. Qin Feiyang turned to look at the golden dragons, and there was a trace of disappointment in his eyes. Roar! The next moment, he took another heavenly dragon's 9 steps, and each step was more terrifying than the previous one. When the 9th step was taken, a huge heavenly dragon roared out, and with a monstrous power, rushed toward the golden dragons. Aren't you too happy too early? You're very strong, but your cultivation is only at the half-step undying realm. The golden dragon smiled ferociously, and the power of the divine dragon suddenly emerged, turning into a huge golden sword, thousands of feet long, across the sky, and exuding a sharp edge that could destroy the world. Heavenly punishment sword kill! The golden dragons roared, and the huge golden sword suddenly tore the sky and slashed toward the heavenly dragon. Boom! Accompanied by a loud noise, the heavenly dragon wailed and immediately shattered in the void. Then, the huge golden sword slashed toward Qin Feiyang, and its aura firmly locked onto Qin Feiyang. The difference in cultivation is indeed a rather troublesome problem. Qin Feiyang whispered. If his cultivation was also at the minor undying realm, the heavenly dragon summoned by the heavenly dragon's 9 steps could compete with the huge golden sword. Because this huge golden sword was also formed by a supreme-level divine art. Unfortunately, the difference in cultivation of 2 minor realms gave him no advantage in terms of divine art. Die! The golden dragon smiled ferociously. You want to kill me just like that? You're too naive. Qin Feiyang snorted and stepped to the side, calmly avoiding the huge golden sword. But before he could recover, the huge golden sword turned in the air and continued to attack him. Still can't dodge. Qin Feiyang was slightly stunned, and then a look of understanding appeared on his face. It turned out that the aura of the huge golden sword had been locked onto him. Since he couldn't dodge, then he would face it head-on. Whoosh! He suddenly turned around and grabbed the huge golden sword with his bare hands. No way! Facing a supreme-level divine art with his bare hands. He's crazy. The battle here had already attracted countless dragons and humans to watch. They stood below on Divine Dragon Island and watched this scene, and couldn't help but feel shocked. No matter how strong your body is, you can't face a supreme-level divine art head-on. How arrogant! If I didn't have the confidence, would I dare to face a supreme-level divine art head-on with my bare hands? Qin Feiyang shook his head speechlessly. Boom! Suddenly, his aura crazily soared. In just an instant, his cultivation soared to the initial stage of the imperishable realm. That's right. It was the Rising Dragon technique. The Rising Dragon technique could now raise his cultivation by 2 minor realms. In other words, it could also raise his cultivation to the initial stage of the imperishable realm. This was also why he didn't use any heaven-defying divine items, the Eye of Heaven, and the 3,000 incarnations to fight with the dragon's patriarch. Because of the difference in cultivation, when facing an imperishable realm expert, the power of a divine art would be greatly reduced. For example, when he was still at the 9th heaven realm, when facing an imperishable realm expert, he couldn't unleash the full power of his divine art. But now it was different. Now he was also an imperishable realm expert, so the power of a divine art could be fully unleashed. Boom! In just an instant, his cultivation suddenly rose to the initial stage of the imperishable realm. Then, he grabbed the incoming golden giant sword and clenched his hand. With a loud clang, the golden giant sword shattered on the spot. Poof! The golden giant sword shattered. An ancestral golden dragon spat out a mouthful of blood. But at this moment, the injury was no longer important to him. He stared at Qin Feiyang's back, his eyes full of shock. He actually crushed the golden giant sword formed by a supreme-level divine art with his bare hands? This kind of power in this physical body was too terrifying. The most important thing was that he actually had a divine art that could raise his cultivation. Now, this person was also at the initial stage of the imperishable realm, the same cultivation as him. How could he fight? Chapter 2907. A mere supreme-level divine art is nothing to me. Qin Feiyang waved his big hand fiercely, and the broken golden greatsword was immediately crushed into pieces. Whoosh! Then, he turned around and took a step forward, landing in front of the chief of the golden dragons. The chief of the golden dragons was stunned, and instinctively took a few steps back. With your strength, I don't need to activate my 3,000 incarnations and the Eye of Heaven. Qin Feiyang raised his hand and slapped the chief of the golden dragon's head. What are you being so arrogant for? Do you really think I can't kill you? The chief of the golden dragons was enraged, and his body emitted a dazzling golden light. Roar! In the next moment, a 5-clawed golden dragon that was thousands of feet long appeared, and the dragon's power surged and shook the world. You finally showed your true body, Qin Feiyang muttered, but his hand didn't stop and continued to slap the chief of the golden dragons. I'll send you to hell. The golden dragon roared and raised his giant tail to slap Qin Feiyang's arm. Boom! The two collided in an instant. How could Qin Feiyang's bull-sized hand be compared to the golden dragon's huge tail? When the two of them were together, one was like an ant while the other was like an elephant. However, it wasn't a competition of size but strength. When Qin Feiyang's palm strike landed, the dragon scales on the golden dragon race's clan head's huge tail shattered with a ka-cha sound. Dragon blood fell like rain and dyed the sky red. The golden dragon chief howled in pain. He opened his mouth and spat out a beam of dragon breath that contained shocking destructive power. However, Qin Feiyang easily dodged the dragon breath with a single teleport. Then, he threw another punch at the golden dragon patriarch. Roar! With another miserable howl, the enormous body of the golden dragon clan's clan chief was sent flying like a meteorite. He can't fight back at all. The chief of the black dragons and the other 8 were shocked to the extreme when they saw this scene. He was so powerful even if he didn't activate his 3,000 incarnations and the Eye of Heaven. Send me to my death. Qin Feiyang smiled coldly and said, Now I'm the one sending you to hell. Heavenly Dragon's 9 steps was executed once again. Ding! A heavenly dragon roared out, carrying with it a world-destroying divine might. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws as it pounced towards the golden dragon. Scram! The golden dragons roared. As the power of the divine dragon emerged, the giant golden sword appeared again and slashed at the sky dragon. But today was different from the past. Right now, Qin Feiyang's cultivation was also at the 9th heaven realm. With a loud clang, the heavenly dragon and the giant sword collided and exploded at the same time, giving birth to a terrifying chi wave that swept in all directions. The void within a radius of several million miles collapsed and shattered madly, as if doomsday had arrived. The 9 members of the Black Dragons and Madman couldn't help but retreat. This fellow is indeed a formidable opponent. The Madman looked at Qin Feiyang, his eyes burning with fighting spirit. If it weren't for the fact that they were facing a formidable enemy, he would have immediately taken action and had a one-on-one battle with Qin Feiyang. Boom! Suddenly, an even more terrifying dragon aura erupted. Madman looked up and saw a giant dragon shadow rushing out from behind the golden dragons. It was the dragon shadow of an ancestral dragon. The mark of the ancestral dragon between its eyebrows was like a burning flame, appearing extremely dazzling. This was the battle soul of the golden dragons. Innate ability, ancestral dragon domain. The golden dragons roared. Ding! The dragon shadow immediately roared into the sky and golden light fell down. In the blink of an eye, a huge golden domain appeared, covering thousands of miles in the sky. Qin Feiyang was also enveloped in the domain. At this moment, he felt a great sense of oppression sweeping over. It was as if his entire body was stuck in a quagmire, unable to move an inch. I'm not even afraid of the ancestral dragon, let alone a mere battle soul. Qin Feiyang smiled contemptuously. Clang! As his voice fell, sword shadows rushed into the sky. A total of 99 sword shadows. That's right. After breaking through to the imperishable stage, the number of Gudyuan sword technique had also increased. In the past there were 90, but now there were 99. However, Qin Feiyang was a little puzzled. Logically speaking, shouldn't there be 100 sword shadows? Because in the past, every time he broke through a realm, there would be 10 more sword shadows. But why was there only 9 more now? 99 sword shadows. Could it be that this was the limit of Gudyuan sword technique? But now was obviously not the time to study this problem. 9 returned to 1. Qin Feiyang shouted in a low voice. Clang! The 99 sword shadows suddenly merged together and turned into a huge sword shadow, slashing towards the ancestral dragon domain with the power to destroy the world. Crack! Accompanied by an ear-piercing crisp sound, the ancestral dragon domain suddenly shattered. One had to know. In the past, when there were only 90 sword shadows, 9 returned to 1 was enough to destroy the world. Not to mention now that there were 99 sword shadows. Although there were only 9 more, the power was already worlds apart from before. Boom! After the ancestral dragon domain shattered, the sword shadow was like a hot knife through butter, directly slashing towards the head of the golden dragons. No! Looking at the oncoming sword shadow, the golden dragons couldn't help but roar in despair. His heart was shrouded in an aura of death. Hurry and help! Seeing that the situation wasn't good, the black dragons hurriedly shouted and rushed towards the golden dragons. The other 8 patriarchs also rushed to rescue him. Since it's a challenge, then it must be fair. What's the point of bullying with numbers? Also, do you think I don't exist? At this moment, Madman's voice sounded. A monstrous baleful aura suddenly roared in this world. The black dragons and the others were shocked and looked towards Madman. They saw that Madman's eyes were blood red, and his evil aura was monstrous. He was like a demon god, making one's heart palpitate. Just as they were distracted, the sword shadow fell mercilessly. Accompanied by a shrill scream, the huge body of the golden dragons was directly slashed into 2. Dragon blood suddenly poured down like a waterfall, dyeing the sky red. Damn it! The black dragons heard the scream and turned his head to look at the bloody scene. He immediately gnashed his teeth and roared like thunder. Qin Feiyang glanced at them indifferently. The sword shadow once again descended, and the sharpness of the sword could topple mountains and overturn seas. Boom! Not only was the golden dragon patriarch's physical body destroyed, but even his divine soul was annihilated by the sword. Qin Batian, I will not let you go. The next moment, an angry roar sounded in the holy land of Divine Dragon Island. This was the voice of the golden dragons. Obviously, he had left his soul in the holy land. In other words, even if he killed the golden dragons now, he could be resurrected again. Really troublesome. Madman frowned. It's not troublesome. Anyway, the battle has already begun. When we break the barrier, the first thing we will do is to destroy that wisp of his soul. Moreover, now that only a wisp of his soul is left, he has already lost his combat strength. We will also have one less strong opponent for the time being. Qin Feiyang said. Although they couldn't completely kill the golden dragons, it was also beneficial for them. After all, the golden dragons were at the initial imperishable stage, and their combat strength couldn't be ignored. And now, only a wisp of his soul was left. Although it wasn't that he didn't have any combat strength, but the combat strength of this wisp of soul was no longer a threat to them. In short, the golden dragons were no longer of any use in the battle at the back. Now it's your turn. Qin Feiyang's gaze turned and landed on the 9 people of the black dragons, saying, Why don't you all just come together, so as not to waste time? The 9 people immediately stared at Qin Feiyang, their eyes gloomy and frightening. Qin Feiyang directly ignored them and looked at Madman, saying, Senior brother, don't stop them. A bunch of trash, there's no need. Haha, Madman laughed and said, "You don't say. The word trash is quite suitable for them. You've gone too far." Hearing the conversation between the two, the 9 people of the Black Dragons immediately roared and revealed their true forms, attacking Qin Feiyang. The 9 divine dragons were Black Dragon, White Dragon, Blood Dragon, Sword Dragon, Wood Dragon, Water Dragon, Earth Dragon, Fire Dragon, and Silver Dragon. Their bodies were thousands of feet long, covered in dense scales, like majestic mountain ridges, and overflowing with ferocious aura. Qin Feiyang, this is all dragon meat, don't waste it. Leave it to benefit the people of the Black Tortoise world. Madman roared. That's what I was thinking. Qin Feiyang grinned. Roar. Accompanied by a loud dragon roar, the purple gold dragon soul appeared. Emperor Domain open. With Qin Feiyang's roar, the Emperor Domain immediately shrouded the surroundings. The 9 patriarchs paused in midair, their minds completely blank. Qin Feiyang glanced at the 9 patriarchs and muttered in a low voice. Soul destruction technique. Boom. An invisible wave suddenly rolled out in all directions with Qin Feiyang as the center. In just an instant, the 9 patriarchs were drowned by the wave. Roar! Accompanied by a series of screams, the divine souls of the 9 patriarchs were directly erased by the soul destruction technique. They died just like that. At this moment, the entire divine dragon island fell into a dead silence. Whether it was the dragons or the humans who followed the dragons, such as Li Xiaofei, they all stared at the corpses of the 10 patriarchs with their mouths agape. These were the patriarchs of the various clans. Not only did they have extremely pure dragon's bloodline, but they also had the cultivation of the initial imperishable stage. Any one of these divine dragons was an existence that could sweep across the 8 desolates and make people tremble in fear, not to mention when they joined forces. But at this moment, they were actually killed by Qin Feiyang just like that? Gasp! Many people sucked in a breath of air. What sort of freak was this Qin Feiyang? Once he stepped into the imperishable stage, it was as if he had changed into another person, so powerful that it made people despair. The 10 ancestor dragons were also watching. Seeing the 10 patriarchs killed in seconds, their hearts could not calm down for a long time. Because the 10 patriarchs were their descendants, they knew their strength very well. Not to mention others, just the divine generals of the Dragon Slayer Palace. These divine generals were all extremely powerful. But even so, these divine generals could not defeat them. But Qin Feiyang had killed them in seconds. What a terrifying human. The point was he was still so young. If he already had such terrifying means at such a young age, what would happen in the future? Lord Dragon Supreme was right. The biggest threat to the dragons was indeed this man. Compared to this man, people like Qin Batian, Lu Xingyang, Supreme Cloud, Supreme Beast, and Yi Zhong were not worth mentioning. Chapter 2908. Damn it, damn it. Qin Feiyang, just you wait, we won't let you go. The roars of the various patriarchs also resounded in the sacred mountain. Who were they? He was an expert at the small success imperishable realm, and he was also the patriarch of the dragon race. He had a pure bloodline, but now they were killed by a human. This was a great humiliation for them, a stain that would last their lives. Childish. Qin Feiyang shook his head and sent the 9 patriarchs' divine dragon bodies into the Black Tortoise world. Obviously, these patriarchs also left their divine souls in the dragon's sacred ground. However, this kind of ruthless behavior really made people look down on them. A loss was a loss. Why did they have to shout a few words? Childish behavior. Madman walked to Qin Feiyang's side and looked down at the divine dragon island, shouting, "Hey, hey, hey, is this all you dragons can do?" The dragons glared at each other. Madman joked, "What's the use of just staring at me? Come out if you have the guts. Young man, don't push your luck. Let people off when possible." A hoarse voice sounded. Madman was taken aback and looked towards the source of the voice, only to see a white-haired old man standing on a mountain peak. "Wang Chong." Qin Feiyang whispered. "Wang Chong." Madman was suspicious. He's a god-level alchemist, and a supreme expert in the great success imperishable stage. Qin Feiyang said. So powerful? Madman was surprised. His dragons should be on the same level as Master and Sovereign Beast. Qin Feiyang nodded. Interesting. The corner of Madman's mouth lifted slightly. Looking down at Wang Chong, he shouted, Old man, don't you feel ashamed at all? What do you mean? Hearing this, Wang Chang's old eyes couldn't help but be suspicious. You don't even understand? It seems that you are even more stupid than I thought. Madman mocked. Wang Chong could not help but frown. Madman asked, What do you think of me and Qin Feiyang? Young and promising, smart and capable. Wang Chong glanced at Qin Feiyang, and the lunatic and commented, That's right. We're so young, yet we know how to benefit the people. Why don't you know? As a god-level alchemist and a supreme expert in the great success undead stage, instead of benefiting the common people, you are aiding the evildoers. Don't you think it's embarrassing? Madman scolded mercilessly. Wang Chong nodded in realization. He was not angry and said indifferently, Everyone has their own ambitions. There's no need to force yourself. Everyone has their own ambitions. It's a pity that our paths are different, and we cannot work together. Now I'm going to challenge you. Do you dare? Madman looked down from above with an overbearing attitude. Wang Chong shook his head and said, This kind of meaningless battle, this old man doesn't like it. After talking for so long, you still don't dare. So what if he's a great success undead stage expert? And a supreme expert in the great perfection undead stage? Aren't they all like cowards, hiding in Divine Dragon Island and not daring to come out? Madman laughed loudly. Arrogant, and unruly laughter echoed over the entire Divine Dragon Island, and did not dissipate for a long time. This was not only provoking Wang Chong, but also provoking Long Zun. Because Long Zun was one of the dragons, the only great perfection undead stage expert in the entire ancient world. Inside the Dragon Palace, Princess Dragon said angrily, Mother, this lunatic is going too far. Ignore him. Next to her, Long Zun waved her hand, but her tone was somewhat gloomy. Obviously, she was also very angry in her heart. But she knew that this was a trap set by Madman and Qin Feiyang to deliberately provoke her. So at this time, she had to endure. It was quite rare to make the dignified Long Zun endure to this extent. After all, Long Zun was the ruler of the ancient world. Thinking back to countless years ago, who dared to be presumptuous in front of her? But now, she was blocked by two brats at her door. But she could only endure. This kind of grievance, this kind of humiliation, was enough to make anyone go crazy. It seems that you are determined to hide. Madman's voice sounded again. Boom. Following closely, a terrifying and monstrous aura suddenly burst out. This is a heaven-defying divine artifact. Princess Dragon suddenly stood up and said angrily, What do they want to do? Long Zun said indifferently, No matter what they want to do, they can't break the barrier set up by your father. Outside, Madman had indeed taken out the Blood Demon Tower. During this period of time, the Blood Demon Tower had been repaired and emitted a shocking aura. I don't believe that this barrier is made of iron. Revive for me. Madman roared. Clang. The Blood Demon Tower immediately began to revive, and its aura became more and more shocking. You revived the heaven-defying divine artifact. Aren't you afraid of hurting the creatures in the west, south, east, and north? Someone from the dragons roared. Madman smiled mockingly and did not answer. The Blood Demon Tower crazily revived. Boom. Soon, the void and sky here began to collapse. The inland sea that had long dried up was also constantly trembling and sinking. Crazy, this is really crazy. The dragons couldn't help but panic. Although during this period of time, Qin Feiyang had repeatedly come to Divine Dragon Island to use the heaven-defying divine artifact, he had never fully recovered, because he was worried that it would affect the creatures in the east, west, north, and south. But now, Madman was actually fully recovering without caring about the price. They weren't Long Zun. Long Zun understood Ice Dragon, so he was full of confidence in this barrier. But they didn't understand Ice Dragon. Although this barrier was very strong, and had always been protecting Divine Dragon Island, The heaven-defying divine artifact was also very terrifying after fully recovering. So now they couldn't help but worry. Even the 10 great ancestral dragons were worried at this moment. Ice Dragon had always been a mysterious existence among dragons. After all, even they, the ancestral dragons, rarely saw Ice Dragon. Clang! Boom! The Blood Demon Tower had already recovered to its peak state. A terrifying destructive aura surged in all directions like a tide. At this moment, the entire inland sea had fallen into a doomsday scene. Wherever the air waves went, everything was destroyed. Finally, this destructive air wave surged out from the inland sea and entered the east, west, south, and north. Crack! Boom! At this moment, the scene of mountains collapsing and the earth cracking appeared in these 4 places. This was a disaster. The mountains, like Dragon God, were instantly razed to the ground. Abyssal cracks appeared and spread in all directions. But this was only the beginning. Soon, this disaster spread to Holy Dragon City. The glorious and majestic Holy Dragon City was reduced to ashes in an instant. This was the power of a heaven-defying divine artifact fully recovered. If they hadn't moved in advance, who knew how many creatures would have died tragically? As for the Mermaid Emperor, Sword Emperor, Black-Winged Emperor, and White-Winged Emperor, they had already left the inland sea and headed to the North Sea, East Sea, West Sea, and South Sea respectively to guard the final pass. Wang Cheng looked at the Blood Demon Tower that had entered a fully recovered state and shouted, "You really don't care about the creatures in the Divine Land? If you don't care, why should we care?" Madman sneered. With a wave of his hand, the Blood Demon Tower immediately blasted toward Divine Dragon Island with the power to destroy the world. Buzz! A terrifying aura overwhelmed the mountains and overturned the seas. The barrier set up by Ice Dragon appeared in the void. Boom! It was also at this moment, the Blood Demon Tower blasted on the barrier and immediately created a wave of destructive air. The barrier immediately trembled. The dragons and humans of Divine Dragon Island couldn't help but stare nervously at the barrier. However, as time went by, the barrier showed no signs of breaking. Not even a full recovery. Madman raised his eyebrows. "Actually, it's all expected," Qin Feiyang said. "What kind of strength did Ice Dragon have? He could even crush a heaven-defying divine artifact. How could a heaven-defying divine artifact shake the barrier he set up? Haha. So what if it's a heaven-defying divine artifact? If you have the ability, blast open Sir Dragon God's barrier. 2 ants also want to shake us dragons. You really overestimate yourselves. Get lost, don't embarrass yourself here." Seeing how powerful the enchantment barrier was, the dragon tribe finally relaxed and began to provoke it. Madman glanced at those people and suddenly turned his head to look at Qin Feiyang. Qin Feiyang understood, and with a thought, 18 heaven-defying divine artifacts including the sunset bow appeared. Clang! Boom! 18 heaven-defying divine artifacts appeared. What a spectacular scene it was. Divine Dragon Island instantly quieted down. One heaven-defying divine artifact couldn't break the barrier. Then what about 18? No. Including the Blood Demon Tower. That would be 19 heaven-defying divine artifacts. Would this barrier be able to withstand it? Everyone couldn't help but be on tenterhooks. One heaven-defying divine artifact and 19 heaven-defying divine artifacts were 2 completely different concepts. "Recover," Qin Feiyang said. Boom! Except for Snowflake and Bloodblade, all the heaven-defying divine artifacts were unsealed and began to recover. Without a doubt, the current scene was even more terrifying. Waves of destructive airwaves crazily surged in all directions. Not only Holy Dragon City, but even Snow Dragon City and Horn Dragon City, which were further away, were also destroyed. Not to mention the south, west, and east. Let's talk about the north. Almost half of the north had been destroyed. Mountains collapsed, heaven and earth shook, and wild winds swept in all directions. This was not like the end of the world, it was the end of the world. At this moment, the divine land had fallen into an unprecedented disaster. Earthquakes, magma, and tsunamis could be seen everywhere. Fortunately, the creatures and resources of the divine land had been transferred to the 4 major regions in advance. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. However, at that time, there were some people and beasts who were very stubborn and didn't move with everyone, choosing to stay in the divine land. At this moment, what they faced was despair. For example, in the northern region, there was a city far away from the inland sea, and there were a few humans in it. They stayed in the divine land with the mentality of being lucky. They thought that this place was so far away from the inland sea that it shouldn't be affected. They even mocked those who moved, saying that they were making a mountain out of a molehill. However, they seriously underestimated the power of the heaven-defying divine artifacts. Who can save us? When the destructive airwaves roared, they immediately realized the seriousness of the problem. They also realized how naive and ridiculous their idea was. They hadn't even seen a heaven-defying divine artifact before, so they tried to guess the power of the heaven-defying divine artifact. Weren't they digging their own graves? Unfortunately, it was too late to regret it now, because now no one would care about them. Heaven and earth didn't respond, and in the end, they all died under the air waves. Chapter 2909. In the sky above Divine Dragon Island, other than Snowflake and Bloodblade, Sunset Divine Bow, and the other 16 heaven-defying artifacts, had all entered a fully awakened state. The sky here dimmed. The storm was roaring wantonly, the airwaves were rolling crazily, including Blood Demon Tower. That's 17 heaven-defying artifacts. With all 17 heaven-defying artifacts awakening, can the barrier set up by Dragon God withstand it? These two bastards, are they really going to force us dragons into a dead end? All the divine dragons and humans on the island were uneasy at this moment. Even the ancestral dragons were so nervous that they broke out in cold sweat. Kill. Suddenly, Qin Feiyang and Frenzy roared at the same time. Sunset Divine Bow and the other heaven-defying artifacts instantly carried the power to destroy the world as they blasted towards the barrier. Although Snowflake and Bloodblade had not fully awakened, they still exerted their greatest power and blasted towards the barrier. Rumble. The 19 heaven-defying artifacts slammed onto the barrier. The barrier immediately trembled violently. The center of the explosion was even more distorted. Hold on. You must hold on. The people of the Dragon Clan all stared fixedly at the barrier, shouting in their hearts. Break. Qin Feiyang and Frenzy were also roaring. However, although the barrier was constantly twisting and trembling, there were no signs of it breaking. Even with all 17 heaven-defying artifacts awakening, it still can't break? Qin Feiyang and Frenzy's expression gradually turned sluggish. This was too strong. One must know. Sunset Divine Bow and the other heaven-defying artifacts had cultivated in the land of origin for many years, and had now reached the initial Dominator realm. Even so, they still couldn't break the barrier set up by Ice Dragon? What cultivation level was this Ice Dragon at? Initial Dominator realm? Greater Dominator realm? Perfect Dominator realm? Or even Perfect Dominator realm? Haha! Lord Dragon God is indeed mighty. Are you feeling powerless now? Desperate? Among the 19 heaven-defying artifacts, 17 of them have been unsealed and awakened, but they still can't break the barrier set up by Dragon God. You can't even break the barrier, yet you want to destroy us dragons? Dream on. Go back and rest. The majesty of the Dragon God is not something you ants can offend. The dragons began to clamor again. This time, they were completely at ease. No matter how heaven-defying Qin Feiyang and the madman were, they couldn't break this barrier. This barrier was an indestructible fortress. Not even a deity descending from the heavens. I don't believe it. Fight to the death for me. Madman roared. However, the Blood Demon Tower, Sunset Divine Bow, and other heaven-defying divine artifacts all stopped. What are you doing? The madman glared at them. I know you are very angry, but this is also the truth. With our strength, we are unable to break this barrier. The artifact spirit of the Sunset Divine Bow said. Madman roared. Then how can we break it? Sovereign weapon. If we also had a sovereign weapon, we would definitely be able to break through. Sunset Divine Bow said. Madman fell silent. Sovereign weapon? How could they possibly have a divine artifact of this level? If they really had one, it wouldn't be so difficult. We dragons do have a sovereign weapon. Do you want us to lend it to you? If you kneel down and beg us, we might really agree. The various ancestral dragons joked. Madman lowered his head and looked gloomily. Qin Feiyang couldn't help but frown. You can't even break the barrier of the dragon god. And you still want to fight us dragons? Don't forget, we have a sovereign weapon. Even if you break the barrier, you will only die. So hurry up and get lost. Don't be an eyesore here. The various ancestral dragons sneered. Since we will only die if we break the barrier, why don't you remove this barrier? Wouldn't it be easier to kill us? In the end, even if you have a sovereign weapon, you don't have the confidence to kill us. Madman's face was full of ridicule. The various ancestral dragons' faces suddenly became gloomy. Indeed, the last time they used the sovereign weapon, they couldn't stop Qin Feiyang. So facing Qin Feiyang now, they didn't dare to be careless. The most important thing was, this sovereign weapon, Long Zun and them couldn't control it. This meant that there were many variables. What? Make you speechless? Since you don't have the ability, then don't talk big. We can't break the barrier, but at least we didn't hide in Divine Dragon Island like a turtle. Don't tell me that you think that holing up in the Divine Dragon Island is something that brings honor to your ancestors? Madman sneered. As soon as these words came out, the dragons were furious to the extreme. What's even more ridiculous is that you dragons have so many supreme powerhouses, but no one dares to come out and fight. I think you should stop calling yourselves dragons in the future. Call yourselves tortoises. Haha, Madman laughed loudly. You're courting death. The various ancestral dragons were furious as they charged towards Madman. However, when they arrived in front of the barrier, they stopped and didn't dare to step out of the barrier. I am courting death, come on. Madman clamored and stepped in front of the various ancestral dragons. There was a barrier between them. The 10 ancestral dragons clenched their fists. Their eyes were extremely gloomy. Don't stare, let's do something practical. I'm standing here. If you have the guts to come out, I'll beat all of you. There's no need for Qin Feiyang to make a move. Madman said. The 10 ancestral dragons were so angry that their teeth were chattering. You don't even dare. Madman sneered and glanced at Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon. Master, have you forgotten how I beat you up in Fallen Valley? Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon suddenly erupted with a terrifying aura. Don't be impulsive. The woman in white quickly grabbed Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon. You are an ancestral dragon. I humiliated you like this. And you can endure it? Come, come, come. This is a rare opportunity. Quickly come and teach me a lesson. Madman looked at Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon with ridicule. Fire Dragon Ancestral Dragon said in a deep voice. Old Black, he is deliberately provoking you. Don't be fooled. Yes, I am deliberately provoking him, so what? And you old things, don't you usually act like I'm invincible? What? Now all of you are like rats. Where's your prestige? Where's your arrogance? Come out and kill me. Haha, no guts. How lowly, the dragon's face has been lost by you. Madman laughed wildly. Little bastard, go and die. Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon couldn't endure it anymore. Even the woman in white couldn't hold him back. He rushed out of the barrier and threw a punch at Madman. Oh no. The woman in white and the other's eyelids twitched. I'm waiting for you to come out. Madman smiled sinisterly, opened the Blood Demon Domain, and threw a punch at Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon's head. The Blood Demon Domain could make a person's cultivation drop by 5 small realms, and Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon's cultivation was at the greater success imperishable stage. If it dropped by 5 small realms, one could imagine what kind of situation Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon would be in. Come back! The Fire Dragon Ancestral Dragon shouted. Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon also recovered his senses and hurriedly retreated back into the barrier. Since you came out, don't even think about going back. Madman grinned sinisterly. His feet took a mysterious step and instantly rushed behind Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon and threw a punch at Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon's back. Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon let out a miserable howl. and his entire body flew forward like a meteorite. This time, it was impossible for him to return to the barrier. Only a dragon tail was left last time. It's not enough for us to make soup. Qin Feiyang chuckled. The soul-extinguishing technique emerged and transformed into a formless huge wave. It rushed towards the black dragon ancestral dragon from all directions. Boom! But black dragon ancestral dragon's divine soul wasn't erased. And Qin Feiyang was surprised. You're not the only one who has a divine artifact to protect the divine soul. The black dragon ancestral Gragon sneered and left without looking back. So what? As long as you come out, it's a dead end. Kill him. Qin Feiyang roared. And the sunset divine bow and other divine artifacts immediately attacked black dragon ancestral dragon. No, black dragon ancestral dragon roared. One must know that these divine artifacts were all in a state of recovery. With his strength, how could he block the attack of so many divine artifacts? But just as he was in despair, a space crack suddenly appeared in the void beside him. Following that, a figure walked out from the crack. It was Long Zun. After Long Zun appeared, he grabbed Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon and returned to the space crack. The next moment, the two of them appeared inside the barrier. Damn you! Can't you have some backbone and fight with us head-on? Always hiding. Is there any point in it? Seeing the meat in his mouth fly away just like that, Madman was so angry that he cursed. Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon looked at Long Zun with a face full of fear and said respectfully, "Thank you, Lord." Long Zun looked at Madman and Qin Feiyang, and then looked at Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon and said, "What did I say last time?" Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon's body trembled. Last time, Long Zun personally said that no one was allowed to leave the barrier. "You can't remember my words, right?" the revered dragon said. His calm tone contained a shocking fury. "I'm sorry." Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon quickly lowered his head. Slap. Long Zun immediately slapped Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon's face, causing blood to flow. Even so, Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon didn't dare to make a sound. He lowered his head and silently endured it. Only this time, Long Zun said, "Yes." Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon nodded. Long Zun then looked at Madman and Qin Feiyang and said, "From now on, no one will leave this barrier, so please put away your little tricks and don't waste your energy." "Is it fun for you to do this?" Qin Feiyang frowned. "Of course it's fun. Looking at your helpless faces against the barrier is also a kind of enjoyment." Long Zun nodded. The dignified Long Zun only has this much courage? I really overestimated you. Qin Feiyang shook his head. I really underestimated you. Your black tortoise boundaries time array shouldn't be that simple. Long Zun said. Yes. Qin Feiyang nodded. Long Zun's heart trembled, and he asked, "How many years is a day?" "Why should I tell you?" Qin Feiyang asked. Chapter 29:10. That's true. How can you reveal such important information to the enemy? But I advise you, instead of wasting time here, you might as well go to the Black Tortoise world and cultivate hard. This way, when I step into the Dominator realm, you might still have a glimmer of hope. Long Zun smiled coldly and turned to leave. Qin Feiyang looked at Long Zun's back, his eyes flickering. The ancestral dragons looked at Qin Feiyang gloomily, and also turned to leave. Whoosh! Qin Feiyang took a deep breath and looked at Long Zun with a smile. Believe me, you don't have time to step into the Dominator realm. Long Zun paused and turned to look at Qin Feiyang suspiciously. The ancestral dragons were the same. With such confidence, could it be that this kid already had a way to break the barrier? Qin Feiyang didn't say anything else. He looked up at the Sunset Divine Bow and other heaven-defying artifacts and said, "Guard this place well. Before I come out, no one is allowed to leave Divine Dragon Island." "Don't worry," the Sunset Divine Bow's artifact spirit shouted. Whoosh! The next moment, Qin Feiyang disappeared without a trace. Lord Long Zun, the ancestral dragons flew to Long Zun's side, their faces full of surprise. Long Zun stared at the void where Qin Feiyang disappeared and spat out two words. Slaughter Domain. Slaughter Domain. Heard of it? The ancestral dragon's eyes suddenly trembled. Is he going to activate the slaughter domain now? Frenzy also muttered. The slaughter domain was Qin Feiyang's strongest trump card. It could be said that no one in the current ancient world could survive under the slaughter domain. Originally, such a trump card should be left for last. After all, the slaughter domain could only last for an hour. It could only be activated once a day. If it was activated now, what would they do when facing the Dominator divine weapon? But at present, it seemed that only the slaughter domain had a chance of breaking the barrier set up by the ice dragon. Lord, I remember that Qin Feiyang also activated the slaughter domain last time, but at that time, he didn't break the Dominator divine realm. As for the Sovereign's divine realm and the Dragon God's barrier, they are almost on par. In other words, even if he activates the slaughter domain, he won't be able to break the barrier, right? The white-robed woman asked with a flustered expression. Towards the slaughter domain, no matter who it was, there was an instinctive fear. Long Zun remained silent. Ancestral Dragon Black Dragon suddenly said, I believe that even if he activates the slaughter domain, he won't be able to break the barrier. Why? Long Zun and the other ancestral dragons looked at him. Do you all remember that he absorbed the blood of almost all the sea beasts in the inner sea? Even so, the power of the slaughter domain was unable to break through the sovereign's divine domain. And now, he doesn't have anywhere to find so much blood. So we don't have to worry at all. We'll talk about it later. Whether or not the power of the slaughter domain can reach this level is still unknown. Ancestral Dragon Black Dragon said. That makes sense. Perhaps his slaughter domain isn't even at the level of a sovereign weapon. The Blood Dragon Ancestor Dragon said in a deep voice. What if he can reach this level with enough blood? The white-robed woman asked. Impossible. How can there be such a heaven-defying technique in this world? Ancestral Dragon Black Dragon shook his head, unwilling to believe it even if he was beaten to death. It's useless to discuss this now. Let's just wait and see. Long Zun finally spoke. The other ancestral dragons nodded. Now they didn't dare to leave. This matter had to be taken seriously, because the slaughter domain was an existence that couldn't be ignored. At the same time, Black Tortoise Realm, Western region, the sea of blood was endless. Along with the strong wind, it swept over with monstrous waves of blood. The joy that was originally filled with vitality had now become a life-forbidden zone. Swish! A figure suddenly descended above the sea of blood. It was Qin Feiyang. Suddenly, another beautiful figure appeared and landed beside Qin Feiyang. Fire Lotus? Qin Feiyang was slightly taken aback. He turned to look at Fire Lotus and asked, Why did you come to the Western region so quickly? You probably don't know yet, but little brat has already given me the authority. Fire Lotus smiled slightly. What authority? Qin Feiyang was curious. The authority to freely enter and exit the Black Tortoise Realm. And after obtaining this authority, I am the same as you. With just a thought, I can reach any place in the Black Tortoise Realm. Fire Lotus smiled. You can do that. Qin Feiyang was surprised. That's right. At first, I also thought it was quite magical. But after thinking about it carefully, if the ice dragon and small beast can freely enter and exit the various continents, then the Black Tortoise Realm can naturally do the same. Fire Lotus said. That's true. Qin Feiyang nodded and asked. Then you can also control the Black Tortoise Realm's rule force now. Fire Lotus nodded. Qin Feiyang said in astonishment. Then what's the difference between you and me? There seems to be no difference. Fire Lotus muttered. After thinking for a while, she shook her head and said, There is still a difference. What's the difference? Qin Feiyang was puzzled. I can't control the Black Tortoise Realm. For example, if you are in seclusion and I leave the Black Tortoise Realm alone, the Black Tortoise Realm won't follow me. You are different. As long as you leave the Black Tortoise Realm, the Black Tortoise Realm will fuse into your body. At that time, no matter where you go, the Black Tortoise Realm will follow you. In other words, the Black Tortoise Realm will always be tied to you. And I only have a little more authority. In my current situation, I am actually the same as the fire python, Yuan Bo. And by long, the protector of the Black Tortoise realm. Fire Lotus smiled. Protector? Qin Feiyang muttered and smiled. With you protecting the Black Tortoise realm, I am very relieved. Fire Lotus was stunned and shook her head. Aren't you afraid that I will become arrogant? You have the right to be arrogant. Qin Feiyang smiled and then glanced at the blood sea below. Fire Lotus glanced at the blood sea, then looked at Qin Feiyang and asked, Are you planning to activate the slaughter domain? Since the battle has already begun, let's end it completely. Qin Feiyang said. But Fire Lotus frowned. I know your concerns. The slaughter domain can only be activated once a day, and it can only be maintained for an hour each time. And we don't know if the power of the slaughter domain can be stacked to the level of a sovereign divine weapon. But being timid is not my style. Since we have decided, we must go all out, Qin Feiyang said. All right. Fire Lotus nodded. You also inform everyone to gather at the Devil's Land, especially the people of the Dragon Slayer Palace. Let them be ready for battle at all times. Qin Feiyang's eyes flashed with a sharp light. What about the Mermaid Princess, Qin Rushuang, Yi Shue'er and the others? Fire Lotus asked. Qin Feiyang pondered for a while and smiled. They will stay in the Black Tortoise realm. Understood. Fire Lotus nodded. Then go. Qin Feiyang waved his hand. Fire Lotus nodded and turned to leave. Wait. Qin Feiyang suddenly spoke again. What's wrong? Fire Lotus turned to look at him suspiciously. Dan Wangkai refined a lot of elixirs and put them in my cultivation room to distribute to everyone. Qin Feiyang said. Okay. Fire Lotus nodded and took a step forward, disappearing without a trace. Life and death. Misfortune and fortune. Victory and defeat. Qin Feiyang looked up at the sky and muttered to himself. His gaze was incomparably deep. Suddenly, a monstrous murderous aura broke out of his body. The fate of the ancient world depends on today. As his voice fell, the slaughter domain suddenly appeared. A blood-colored storm immediately set off. Clang! When the blood-colored sword appeared, the blood of the blood sea below surged toward the slaughter domain like a tide. Clang! The blood-colored sword constantly trembled, as if it was very excited. A world-destroying sharpness spread out in all directions. In just a few breaths, the entire Black Tortoise world felt Qin Feiyang's murderous aura and the sharpness of the blood-colored sword. This murderous aura, this sharpness, only the slaughter domain. Two figures stood side by side on top of a mountain peak, looking at the western domain. It was Pai Lupi and Theta Wang. The appearance of the slaughter domain means that the Lord God is ready to fight against the dragons. Theta Wang said in a deep voice. Pai Lupi nodded and then sighed. But we can't interfere in the battle against the dragons. That's right. The dragons are too strong. We don't even have the qualifications to be cannon fodder. Theta Wang sighed. Pai Lupi clenched his fists and said, Although we can't interfere, we can become the backing of the Lord God. Backing? Theta Wang was taken aback. That's right. What does the Lord God need to open the slaughter domain? It's blood. He's fighting outside, and we'll collect blood for him in the Black Tortoise world. Immediately pass down the order. Whether it's humans or beasts, they must give me half of their blood. Those who don't obey kill. After all, this battle is not only about the fate of the ancient domain, but also the fate of our Black Tortoise world. Because if the Lord God dies in battle, the Black Tortoise world will fall into the hands of the dragons. At that time, none of the living beings here will be able to escape, Pai Lupi said in a deep voice, his entire body filled with a shocking murderous aura. Theta Wang said, Then let's split up. Let's go. As his voice fell, the two turned into a stream of light and disappeared. Zhengzhou. Everyone above the Nine Heavens realm, gather here quickly. Qin Batian and Lu Jingyang stood high in the sky. As Qin Baishan's voice fell, one figure after another rushed out from the ground below. Finally, there were 5 to 6 million people gathered here. The lowest cultivation was at the half-step Nine Heavens realm. Boom! More than 100 terrifying auras appeared. The Rain Emperor, the Ice Emperor, and the 108 generals landed behind Qin Batian and Lu Jingyang one after another. The Rain Emperor and the Ice Emperor's cultivation had already reached the great success Undead Realm. The moment you've been waiting for has finally arrived. However, it's hard to say whether you'll live or die in this battle. I want to ask you, are you prepared? Qin Batian glanced at the millions of people and said in a deep voice, "What joy is there in life? What pain is there in death? We're prepared to die in battle." Everyone shouted in unison. Their loud and clear voices resounded in the sky above Zhongzhou for a long time, and even spread to the Devil's Land. The Devil's Land! Fire Lotus looked at Zhongzhou, then looked at Hui, the five-clawed golden dragon, the blood Qilin, Zhao Tailai, and the others standing in the void in front of her and asked, "Are you prepared? What haven't we seen before? Mere dragons, what's there to be afraid of?" Zhao Tailai laughed heartily. Tang Hai's eyes under the mask also had a trace of a smile. Thinking back to the battle between Great Qin and the demon ancestor, it was almost impossible to win. But in the end, everyone worked together and fought a bloody battle, and finally won. This time was no exception. Chapter 29:11. The Black Tortoise Realm was filled with a murderous aura. Everyone was looking forward to the start of the battle. Of course, there was also some fear. After all, the opponent was the dragons. The dragons were a super overlord that had ruled the ancient world for countless years. The revered dragon was the strongest in the ancient world. How could it be an easy task to shake them? But, for the future generations, for the future of the ancient world, they had to face it. This required a lot of determination and courage. They didn't want this battle to fail, because this was the first time in the history of the ancient world that they tried to overthrow the rule of the dragons. If they failed the first time, then the position of the dragons in the ancient world would be even more secure. Humans would also lose confidence. Then no one in the future generations would dare to fight against the dragons. It could be said that, once they failed, it would be a vicious cycle. Humans would no longer have any hope of rising. Outside, 18 heaven-defying divine artifacts, intimidating everyone. The madman stood in the wind without any fear on his face. He was like a god, causing the dragons to be intimidated. "Lord revered dragon, should we also make arrangements in advance?" The madman's domineering aura, and Qin Feiyang's confidence, made the great ancestral dragons start to panic. The revered dragon was silent. In his mind, Qin Feiyang's words from before couldn't help but appear again. "You don't have time to step into the ruler realm." What a confident sentence. And the madman's current attitude, facing all the dragons, there was no fear at all. This kind of confident attitude must have been given to him by Qin Feiyang. Could it be that the slaughter domain could really be stacked to the level of a ruler divine weapon? If that was the case, then the battle would be very bad. The dragon's greatest confidence was the ruler divine weapon and the barrier that protected the divine dragon island. Once the power of the slaughter domain was stacked to the level of the ruler divine weapon, then their advantage would be gone. No, just in case, they had to make arrangements in advance. The revered dragon turned to look at the great ancestral dragons and said in a deep voice, "Go and collect the resources of the divine dragon island immediately, and let them all retreat into the sacred mountain." Yes, the 10 ancestral dragons responded respectfully, then spread out and shouted, "Everyone, head to the Saint Mountain at once. Without our permission, no one is allowed to step out of the Saint Mountain." To the sacred mountain? Why did you give such an order? Could it be that Qin Feiyang really has the ability to break the barrier laid down by the dragon god? In an instant, the dragons fell into a state of panic. Don't panic. We dragons have stood tall in the ancient world for countless years. No one can even dream of shaking us. I let you enter the sacred mountain purely because I was afraid that you would be accidentally injured in the battle later. The white-clothed woman said loudly. Hearing these comforting words, everyone calmed down and quickly retreated to the holy mountain. What about us? The million humans who had defected to the dragons looked left and right, feeling helpless. Wang Chang glanced at Long Zun from afar and said, "All of you head to the holy mountain as well." Yes, he had heard of it. The million people were overjoyed, and immediately rushed to the holy mountain. Wang Chang glanced at these people, then took a step forward and landed beside Long Zun. He cupped his hands and said, "You won't blame this old one for acting on his own, right? Tell me the reason why you let them enter the holy mountain." Long Zun said. Wang Chang said, "This old one doesn't want to cause internal strife because of this." "Speak clearly," Long Zun said. "Back then, these people were willing to enter Divine Dragon Island, even without the control of the Divine Stone of Fate. It can be seen that they are indeed loyal to us dragons. But if at this time, we only let our own people retreat to the holy mountain and leave them outside, what will they think? Without a doubt, they will be bitterly disappointed. Of course, with the strength of us dragons, even if they rebel, they won't pose any threat to us. But in this way, we will completely lose the hearts of the people. There's a good saying that water can carry a boat, but it can also sink it. It's the same for a world. So we can't lose the hearts of the people. Otherwise, even if we dragons win this battle, no one will trust us again," Wang Chang explained. Long Zun swept a glance at the 1 million people retreating to the holy mountain and said indifferently, "Then if this sovereign says that he wants to blame you, will you betray us dragons like Yi Zhong and the Beast Emperor? Your Excellency must be joking. This old one was born as a man of the dragons, and will die as a ghost of the dragons." Wang Chang smiled faintly. Hearing this, Long Zun nodded in gratification. "This sovereign didn't misjudge. You are the one who can truly be trusted. Thank you for your appreciation, Your Excellency." Wang Chang cupped his hands. Long Zun asked, "Then, do you think that Qin Feiyang's slaughter domain can be stacked to the level of a ruler?" Wang Chang pondered for a moment and said with a smile, "I think that even Qin Feiyang himself doesn't know about this." "What do you mean?" Long Zun turned to look at him. If the power of the slaughter domain can really be stacked to the level of a ruler's divine weapon, then with Qin Feiyang's personality, he should have collected blood and started an all-out war with us when he escaped from the ruler's divine realm. However, he didn't do so and chose to continue enduring. What does this mean? It means that he doesn't have enough confidence. Wang Chang said. That makes sense. Long Zun thought carefully and nodded with a smile. However, we can't be careless. Since he said that to you, it means that he has made a lot of preparations in advance. Wang Chang said. You mean that he has collected a lot of blood in advance? Long Zun asked. Wang Chang nodded. Although we don't know how many lives there are in the Black Tortoise world, this old one believes that he must have collected a lot of blood after so many years. After saying that, he added, moreover, the Black Tortoise world has a time array, which will undoubtedly give him more time to collect blood. Hearing this, Long Zun raised his head to look at the madman standing in the sky and muttered, this sovereign doesn't believe that the blood he has collected over the years can compare to the blood of all the sea beasts in the internal sea. This matter is really hard to say. Wang Chang looked at the sky, but he didn't say this out loud. He only said it in his heart. This was because this Qin Feiyang couldn't be looked at with ordinary eyes. For example, last time, no one believed that Qin Feiyang would sneak into the Divine Dragon Island to rescue the Chief Pavilion Master. But he did. In the end, he successfully left the Divine Dragon Island. He did these things that were impossible in the eyes of others. Could such a person be underestimated? No. Boom. In the blink of an eye. At this moment, accompanied by a terrifying aura, a figure surrounded by blood qi appeared in the sky. It was Qin Feiyang. His body was shrouded in a killing domain, and the blood sword in his hand released a world-destroying sharpness. And that sharpness was even more terrifying than a fully awakened heaven-defying artifact. Even the Sunset Divine Bow and other heaven-defying artifacts couldn't help but feel panic at this moment. One could imagine. The power of the killing domain was terrifying. He came out. That's his killing domain. So terrifying. That's simply the incarnation of a killing god. When the retreating dragon race saw Qin Feiyang, they immediately turned pale with fright. What are you still in a daze for? Hurry to the sacred land. The ancestral dragons roared. At this moment, all the dragons and all the humans continued to rush towards the sacred land, as if they were fleeing for their lives. Long Zun and Wang Chang looked at the blood sword, and their pupils couldn't help but shrink. The power seems to be stronger than last time, Long Zun whispered. Wang Chang nodded. As expected, this kid had already made ample preparations. At the same time, Qin Feiyang held the blood sword and landed beside Madman, asking, "What's the situation?" Madman laughed and said, "The dragons have already ordered everyone and all the resources to withdraw from the sacred mountain." Sacred mountain, Qin Feiyang murmured, his gaze sweeping towards the location of the sacred mountain, and said with a smile, "This will save a lot of trouble." "That's right. Less when we fight with them. These spirit vein and crystal vein will be destroyed. What a pity." Madman chuckled. With this tone, this attitude, the resources of Divine Dragon Island were already in their pockets. Qin Feiyang glanced at Long Zun and the others and said, "All right, don't waste time, let's begin." After saying that, he raised the blood sword in his hand, and his eyes were as sharp as a blade. Clang! Accompanied by an earth-shattering sound, the blood sword suddenly flew out of his hand, carrying a monstrous blood light and killing intent, slashing towards the enchantment. At this moment, whether it was Qin Feiyang and Madman, Long Zun and the others, or the dragons and humans who had fled to the sacred ground, they all stared at the blood sword. The difference was, Qin Feiyang and Madman roared in their hearts, "Shatter," and the dragons roared in their hearts, "You must hold on." Boom! Under everyone's gaze, the blood sword finally hit the enchantment. Boom! The barrier immediately began to tremble violently, and it even began to distort and deform. A terrifying destructive wave, with this place as the center, rolled out in all directions. The sun and moon lost their light, and all directions were destroyed. "Hold on. You must hold on." The hearts of all the dragons were in their throats. Even the ancestral dragons, Long Zun and Wang Chang, were extremely nervous. Time passed breath by breath. Although the enchantment was madly twisting, there was no sign of it breaking. "Still not working." Madman frowned. Qin Feiyang's face also darkened. The current killing zone had already surpassed the power of the battle with Long Zun in the inner sea. In other words, the power of the killing zone had already surpassed the third stage. Qin Feiyang divided the power of the killing zone into 4 stages. The first stage was a heaven-defying divine artifact that had not been unsealed. The second stage was comparable to Long Zun's strength, which was the peak undead stage. The third stage was a heaven-defying divine artifact that had been unsealed. The fourth stage was a dominator divine weapon, but now it seemed that it was still far from the level of a dominator divine weapon. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been in a stalemate for so long. "Does the Black Tortoise realm still have blood?" Madman asked in a deep voice. "Yes." Qin Feiyang nodded. At least 2/3 of the blood stored in the Black Tortoise realm was left. After all, after so many years, the amount of blood stored had reached an unprecedented level. He originally thought that absorbing 1/3 of the blood was enough, and the remaining 2/3 would be left for later, just in case. But now it seemed that he had to continue absorbing. Chapter 29:12. From the looks of it, we can hold on. Are we still going to the sacred mountain now? The dragons and humans heading to the sacred mountain couldn't help but hesitate. "Are you still looking? Do you believe that I won't kill you all?" Seeing this, the ancestral dragons were furious. Hearing this, no one dared to hesitate anymore, and continued to head to the sacred mountain. The ancestral dragons also seized the time to gather resources. Clang! At the same time, Qin Feiyang waved his hand, and the blood-colored sword returned to his hand. This is already stronger than a heaven-defying divine artifact, but it still can't break this barrier? Frenzy looked at the blood-colored sword and couldn't help but frown. No rush. There are still 2/3 of the blood in the western region that hasn't been absorbed. Qin Feiyang said and disappeared again. What? There are still 2/3 of the blood that hasn't been absorbed? Wang Chang was shocked when he heard this. He turned to look at Long Zun and asked, "Did you hear that?" Long Zun nodded, his face gloomy. He didn't expect that he had already collected so much blood. It seemed that this barrier would be broken sooner or later. Black Tortoise World. Western region. Qin Feiyang stood above the sea of blood and frantically absorbed the blood. The amount of blood he absorbed this time was more than any previous time. He could clearly feel that the murderous aura was eroding his soul and mind, as if it wanted to occupy his consciousness and reason. This was the reason why he had absorbed too much. But now, there was no room for negotiation. He had to continue. The power of the blood-colored sword soared once again. The entire black tortoise world could feel that world-destroying sharpness. Clang! Suddenly, the blood-colored sword suddenly trembled, and an unprecedented aura and sharpness roared out. Boom! Crack! The void and sky of the western region began to collapse. Not good. Get out! The little boy's exclamation sounded in the sky. He was very anxious. It seemed that the power of the blood-colored sword could already pose a great threat to the black tortoise world. Qin Feiyang looked at the collapsing void and sky, and his eyelids twitched slightly. Then, under the little boy's reminder, he hurriedly took the blood-colored sword and left the black tortoise world. That was close. The little boy then appeared in the sky above the western domain. As he looked around, his face was filled with fear. Whoosh! At this moment, the fire lotus flew over with a sea of blood behind her. She was also shocked when she saw the collapsed void and sky. What happened? Fire Lotus asked. The little boy said, "It's all because of the slaughter zone." Fire Lotus was stunned for a moment before she exclaimed, "That means the slaughter area is already?" Yes. The little boy nodded and said, "It has reached the level of a sovereign divine weapon." That's great. Fire Lotus was delighted. The slaughter domain could really reach the level of a sovereign divine weapon. This was equivalent to giving people hope for victory. Yeah, this is truly unbelievable. I can't help but suspect that this slaughter domain might be a sovereign-level divine art. The little boy whispered. A dominator-level divine art, Fire Lotus muttered. The little boy looked at the sea of blood brought by the Fire Lotus and asked suspiciously, "Where did this blood come from?" It was Pai Lupi and Theta Wong who took the initiative to collect it, and they are still collecting it. Fire Lotus said, "Not bad, not bad. They are all people with a conscience." The little boy nodded, then lowered his head to look at the sea of blood below and said, "Although the blood here can still allow Qin Feiyang to activate the fourth stage of the slaughter zone, we still can't be careless." Yes. Fire Lotus nodded. In other words, the blood collected before was enough for Qin Feiyang to activate the fourth stage of the slaughter zone twice. At the same time, outside, following Qin Feiyang's appearance, the 18 heaven-defying divine artifacts immediately rushed forward and brought Madman away, fleeing far away. Because when Qin Feiyang appeared, they sensed the power of the blood-colored sword. This was an aura of death. Therefore, they immediately went forward and took Madman away from this place. Not good. At the same time, inside the enchantment, Wang Chong and Long Zun's faces also changed. Although separated by the enchantment, they could still feel a fatal threat. Obviously, the current slaughter zone was no longer on the same level as the previous slaughter zone. As for the people on the dragons, they had already entered the area of the Holy Mountain. The 10 great ancestral dragons also took the resources of the Divine Dragon Island into their respective spatial divine objects. These resources were mainly the spirit vein and crystal vein. As for medicinal herbs, although they were also indispensable resources, they were not that important in comparison. The 10 great ancestral dragons also headed to the Holy Mountain and placed their respective spatial divine objects on the peak of the Holy Mountain, because in their opinion, there was no place safer than the peak of the Holy Mountain. They immediately left the Holy Mountain and returned to Long Zun's side, looking up at Qin Feiyang. Looking at the blood-colored sword in Qin Feiyang's hand, the 10 people's eyes were incomparably solemn. Crack! Boom! The power of the blood-colored sword had already reached a terrifying level. The void and sky here were also crazily collapsing like before in the western region. I'd like to see how strong the enchantment laid down by Ice Dragon is. Qin Feiyang smiled coldly. Holding the blood-colored sword with both hands, he raised it high, then took a step forward and landed in front of the enchantment, slashing down with his sword. Boom! A monstrous might suddenly erupted, destroying everything in all directions. The enchantment once again distorted and shook. Long Zun, Wang Chong, and the 10 great ancestral dragons were all nervous to the extreme. The dragons and humans hiding in the holy mountain were also staring at the enchantment and the blood-colored sword. At this moment, the entire Divine Dragon Island fell into a dead silence. Everyone was nervous, uneasy, and terrified. Come on! You can do it! In the distance, Madman was cheering for Qin Feiyang. The enchantment must be broken, and it must be fast, because only in this way could they end this battle before the slaughter zone ended. The slaughter zone could only be maintained for half an hour. This was a race against time. If it dragged on, it wouldn't do them any good. The 18 heaven-defying divine artifacts were also ready to fight, waiting for the enchantment to break. However, that enchantment was also unimaginably terrifying. Although it was twisting crazily, it still didn't break. Shatter for me. Qin Feiyang suddenly jumped up, grabbed the blood-colored sword, and once again slashed at the enchantment with all his strength. All the bones and blood vessels in his body bulged out from under his skin. His whole person was like a devil god, his eyes burning with unyielding anger. Boom! Accompanied by an earth-shaking loud sound, the blood-colored sword once again hit the enchantment. Kacha! Immediately, a weak crisp sound came from the enchantment. Oh no! The 10 great ancestral dragons suddenly turned pale with fright. Although this crisp sound was very, very soft, and even difficult to hear if one didn't listen carefully, when it fell into their ears, it was like a clap of thunder. Because this was the sound of the enchantment breaking. Haha! Again! Madman laughed loudly. Finally he saw hope. Qin Feiyang's eyes were like torches, once again soaring high. His aura was like a rainbow. Shatter! Following his angry roar, his whole person immediately swooped down. The blood-colored sword once again slashed at the enchantment with an apocalyptic sharpness. The previous sword caused a small crack to appear on the enchantment. And this time, Qin Feiyang's goal was precisely this crack. Kacha! As the sword fell, the tip of the sword directly hit the crack. Another crisp sound rang out. It was louder and more ear-piercing than before. Immediately, a terrifying wave rolled out like a volcanic eruption. Following closely, the crack on the enchantment was rapidly expanding at a speed visible to the naked eye. This is the slaughter domain. Long Zun's gaze trembled. Strong. It was too strong. The 10 great ancestral dragons, and even Wang Chong couldn't help but tremble. How could a mere god art be so powerful to this extent? Could this slaughter domain be a sovereign-level god art? It's cracked. The dragons and humans of the holy mountain were also flustered. If the enchantment was broken, who could stop the current Qin Feiyang? A slaughter domain comparable to a sovereign-level god weapon, and 18 heaven-defying god weapons. And there was also Qin Batian, these terrifying supreme experts. Was today really the end of the dragons? Everyone, don't panic, we still have a sovereign-level god weapon. The black dragons shouted. In fact, he was even more flustered because now he was only left with a wisp of divine soul. If the enchantment was broken and the battle started, he was afraid that he would not be able to escape. Therefore, he could only place his hopes on the sovereign-level god weapon. That's right. We still have a sovereign-level god weapon. This is a genuine sovereign-level god weapon. Even if the enchantment is broken, he can't defeat the sovereign-level god weapon. We dragons have ruled the ancient realm for so many years. We are not something that these ants can shake. Lord God Weapon, you are our faith, our guardian god. Please, you must help us kill this thief and restore the might of us dragons. At this moment, all the dragons and the millions of humans were kneeling on the ground, looking at the holy mountain devoutly, as if on a pilgrimage. Boom! As if hearing their pleas for help, a weak aura gradually spread out from the holy mountain. Although it was very weak at first, it became stronger and more terrifying. Like a god, it was slowly awakening. Clang! At this moment, in the sky, another deafening sword cry rang out. Everyone hurriedly looked up, and saw Qin Feiyang attacking the enchantment for the third time. The blood-colored sword shattered the sky for millions of miles, as if it was a sword that could split heaven and earth. and once again blasted towards the enchantment. At this moment, the enchantment was like a broken mirror. With Qin Feiyang's third sword strike, it immediately collapsed. Boom! As the enchantment collapsed and shattered, the sharp edge of the blood-colored sword, like a torrent that had opened a gate, crazily poured into Divine Dragon Island. Long Zun, Wang Chang, and the 10 great ancestral dragons were below, so they bore the brunt of it. At this moment, they sensed a fatal crisis. Just the sharp edge of the blood-colored sword was enough to shatter their bodies and bones. Haha! I finally broke your turtle shell. Madman laughed loudly. Clang! However, at the same time, in the holy mountain, a sword cry suddenly rang out, followed by a shocking divine power. Whoosh! Almost in an instant, a sword light swept out from the holy mountain, blasting towards the sharp edge of the blood-colored sword. Boom! Immediately, the sharp edge dissipated. Following closely, the sword light carried a terrifying power and charged towards Qin Feiyang. Lord God Weapon has finally made his move. Qin Feiyang, just wait for your death. The dragons were suddenly in an uproar. Each and every one of them was wild with joy. Chapter 29:13. Die! Qin Feiyang smiled coldly, holding the blood-colored sword in his hand. He did not retreat at all, and slashed towards the sword light. He had full confidence in the current blood-colored sword, because the current blood-colored sword's power had already reached the level of a sovereign divine weapon. Facing the dragon's sovereign divine weapon, it was not without the power to fight. Not to mention, it was just a sword light. Clang! In an instant, the blood-colored sword and the sword light collided, and a destructive wave immediately rolled out in all directions with this place as the center. The sky fell and the earth cracked. The void was annihilated. The end of the world was nothing more than this. Not good. The faces of the ancestral dragons changed drastically. Once this wave drowned Divine Dragon Island, the consequences would be unimaginable. Sovereign Divine Realm. Longzuan roared. At that moment, dazzling divine light gushed out from the sacred mountain. In an instant, a huge barrier appeared, enveloping the entire Divine Dragon Island. The billowing waves swept out, but they were all blocked outside the barrier. That's right. This was the sovereign divine realm. Even if the ice dragon's barrier was broken, there was still the sovereign divine realm to protect Divine Dragon Island. However, although the waves were blocked outside by the sovereign divine realm, the sovereign divine realm was also distorted and trembling. It seemed that this was already the limit it could bear. My lord, his slaughter domain is too strong now. I'm afraid even the sovereign divine realm can't block it. Looking at the distorted sovereign divine realm, the 10 ancestral dragons were worried. Longzuan was silent. Do you think I'm still that Qin Feiyang? A mere sword light. And you want to stop me? Shatter for me. Qin Feiyang's roar resounded. Crack. Accompanied by a deafening sound, the sword light shattered on the spot. Terrifying. It's really terrifying. The ancestral dragons looked at this scene. Their eyes trembled, and their bodies turned cold. The power of this slaughter domain was on a completely different level from the previous battle in the internal sea. The power of the slaughter domain was only equivalent to a revived heaven-defying artifact. And this time, the power of the slaughter domain had obviously surpassed the heaven-defying artifact and reached the level of a sovereign divine weapon. Buzz! At the same time, another dazzling divine light rushed out of the sacred mountain, and another sovereign divine realm appeared. That was right. There were 2 sovereign divine realms here. A sovereign deity domain enveloped the Divine Dragon Island, protecting the dragons. Another sovereign's divine domain enveloped the entire inland sea, turning it into a cage. The last time Qin Feiyang had entered the inland sea, he had been trapped between these 2 overlords, and had almost lost his life. Because they were trapped in the middle, they could not kill their way into Divine Dragon Island or leave the inner sea. He was like a turtle in a jar. What is it? You want to imprison me again? Qin Feiyang glanced at the sovereign realm in the sky and sneered at Longzuan. Longzuan remained silent. In the past, I would have fled the inner seas without hesitation the moment I saw a sovereign's divine domain. But now, Qin Feiyang's face was filled with disdain as he continued. Not even a sovereign realm can stop the sword in my hand. As soon as he finished speaking, Qin Feiyang grabbed the blood-red sword and rushed into the sky, slashing at the sovereign divine domain that had yet to take shape. World-destroying edge. With a loud bang, the sovereign divine domain that had yet to take shape shattered on the spot. Longzuan's pupil shrank slightly when he saw this scene. He remembered that the last time Qin Feiyang had faced a sovereign divine domain, he had relied on two heaven-defying divine artifacts, the Sunset Divine Bow, and the third stage of the Slaughter Domain to barely break through the sovereign divine domain. But this time, just the Slaughter Domain had crushed the sovereign divine domain as easily as crushing dry weeds. Although the sovereign divine domain had yet to take shape, it shouldn't have been so weak. The only explanation was that everything he had seen before was not a dream. The Slaughter Domain had really reached the level of a sovereign. This was undoubtedly a nightmare for the dragons. Today is different from the past. Back then, the Slaughter Domain was only at the third stage. But now, the Slaughter Domain has entered the fourth stage. I'm not afraid of a sovereign divine weapon. Clang. Qin Feiyang was domineering. He grabbed the blood-red sword with both hands and swooped down, slashing at the sovereign divine domain that had enveloped Divine Dragon Island. Quickly enter the sacred mountain, Longzuan roared. Whoosh! At that moment, Wang Chang and the 10 great ancestral dragons rushed towards the sacred mountain without looking back. At the same time, the Prince of Dragons also appeared with the Princess of Dragons from the Dragon Palace, and rushed into the sacred mountain like lightning. But Longzuan didn't move. She raised her head and stared at Qin Feiyang and the blood-red sword. In fact, there was still a trace of luck in her heart. She hoped that the sovereign divine domain could block Qin Feiyang. Boom! Accompanied by an earth-shattering sound, the blood-red sword fell, tearing through the sky, and fiercely bombarding the sovereign divine domain. The sovereign divine domain immediately trembled, and a small crack appeared. Seeing this, the great ancestral dragons hurriedly shouted, "My lord, quickly come to the sacred mountain." But Longzuan turned a deaf ear, and continued to stare at Qin Feiyang. Clang! Qin Feiyang was like a god of war. His blood-red hair fluttered as he held the blood-red sword, and slashed at the sovereign divine domain again. Crack! The crack on the sovereign divine domain instantly became bigger. Sigh! Longzuan sighed. He didn't dare to stay any longer, and quickly entered the sacred mountain. Just as Longzuan entered the sacred mountain, Qin Feiyang attacked the sovereign divine domain for the third time. At that moment, accompanied by a deafening sound, the sovereign divine domain shattered. The sovereign divine domain opened once every 10 years, and lasted for half a year each time. In other words, once the sovereign divine domain shattered, it would have to wait 10 years before it could open again. Therefore, the sovereign divine domain was no longer able to pose any resistance to Qin Feiyang and the others. Let the battle begin. Qin Feiyang looked at the sacred mountain, and waved the blood-red sword in his hand. Thousands of sword chi suddenly turned into a frenzy, and rushed towards the Divine Dragon Island. Boom! Crack! At that moment, the Divine Dragon Island began to collapse and sink. Wherever the sword chi went, the mountains and rivers were all shattered and annihilated. Lord Longzuan, what should we do? All the dragons and humans on the sacred mountain fell into an uncontrollable panic. Useless thing, you're already afraid? Longzuan roared. Everyone's faces were pale. They didn't dare to contradict Longzuan, nor did they dare to face Qin Feiyang. There was only despair left in their hearts. Longzuan took a deep breath, turned to look at the sacred mountain, and said respectfully, "Lord Divine Weapon, the dragons are in danger, please help us. Lord Divine Weapon, please help us." The 10 ancestral dragons knelt on the ground respectfully. "Lord Divine Weapon, please help us." The other dragons and the millions of humans also knelt on the ground once again, their expressions incomparably pious. "Beg it. Then you might as well beg us to be merciful." Madman laughed loudly in the distance. If it was any other time, the dragons would definitely be furious. But at this moment, no one cared about Madman. All of them looked at the sacred mountain pitifully. Boom! The frenzy formed by thousands of sword chi was about to reach the sacred mountain. Clang! It was also at this moment. Inside the sacred mountain, the sound of a sword suddenly reverberated. The next moment, rays of divine light emerged and turned into a barrier that instantly enveloped the entire sacred mountain. Boom! The sword chi frenzy bombarded the barrier, but it was actually blocked by the barrier. Lord Divine Weapon is mighty. Seeing this scene, the dragons immediately became excited. Clang! At the same time, inside the sacred mountain, the sword cry became louder and louder, and the sharpness and aura it emitted became more and more terrifying. Qin Feiyang felt this oppressive aura, and his expression became solemn. Clang! All of a sudden, a milky white light rushed out from the sacred mountain and charged towards Qin Feiyang at a terrifying speed. This speed was so fast that even Longzun couldn't catch it. Then there was no need to talk about Qin Feiyang. He couldn't lock onto that light at all, let alone see what it was. Not good. That's the sovereign divine weapon's true body. Be careful. The sunset bow's artifact spirit suddenly roared. Divine weapon's true body. Qin Feiyang's eyes darkened. It seemed that the sovereign divine realm still chose to protect the dragons. Then this battle was unavoidable. Since he couldn't see it, then he wouldn't look. Qin Feiyang directly closed his eyes and used his heart to sense. Still closing your eyes, isn't this courting death? Princess Dragons looked at Qin Feiyang's reaction and couldn't help but sneer. Wrong. For someone like him who has a strong sense of battle, it's easier to see everything clearly with his eyes closed. Prince Dragons shook his head. Brother, what time is it now? Why are you still praising him? Princess Dragons frowned. It's the truth. The prince of the dragon clan smiled. There wasn't even the slightest bit of tension from him. And previously, everyone was pleading for the sovereign divine weapon to help, but only he didn't. He seemed very calm and composed. Not to mention anything else, just this mentality alone was enough to make people admire him. Boom! That light finally arrived in front of Qin Feiyang. It was also at this moment. Qin Feiyang, who had his eyes closed, suddenly raised the blood-colored sword in his hand and swung it forward. Clang! Immediately, along with the appearance of sparks, a world-destroying aura erupted from this place. Did you see that? If he keeps looking with his naked eyes, he might not be able to block this sword. The prince of the dragon clan said with a smile. Humph! Princess Dragons' face was full of displeasure. The prince of the dragon race glanced at the princess of the dragon race. Then, he looked at Qin Feiyang and muttered, Let me see how much potential you have. Clang! With a collision, the light formed by the sovereign divine weapon disappeared again and attacked Qin Feiyang from behind. Swish! But Qin Feiyang's speed wasn't any slower than the sovereign divine weapon. With a turn of his body, he slashed out again. Clang! The two collided once again. Heaven and earth turned into chaos, and destructive waves of air were earth-shattering. The sunset divine bow and other heaven-defying divine weapons protected Madman and kept retreating. It could be said that the shockwaves from the collision between the blood-colored sword and the sovereign divine weapon, even the heaven-defying divine weapons, didn't dare to take it head-on. Madman frowned and said, This battle we don't seem to be able to intervene. Is there even a need to say that? This is a battle between sovereign divine weapons we can only watch. Sunset Divine Bow said. But Qin Feiyang's slaughter domain can only last for half an hour. If this continues, it won't be good. Madman was worried. Then there's no other way now. I only hope that before the slaughter domain ends, Qin Feiyang can destroy this sovereign divine weapon. As long as this sovereign divine weapon is destroyed, then with our strength, we will be able to wipe out the dragons. Sunset Divine Bow said with a murderous aura. Kid, you can do it. Madman raised his head and looked at Qin Feiyang. His hands clenched together as he muttered. Chapter 29:14. Clang! Rumble! High up in the sky, Qin Feiyang and the sovereign divine weapon continued to clash. In an instant they collided more than a dozen times. Destructive airwaves surged wildly in all directions. Qin Feiyang, aren't you afraid of implicating the creatures in the north, south, west, and east? More than that, I think the north, west, south, and east are already in a terrible situation. Blood is flowing like a river. The ancestral dragon sneered. Since the sovereign divine weapon had already made its move, of course, they had nothing to be afraid of. Because in this ancient world, no one could defeat the sovereign divine weapon. A bunch of idiots. Qin Feiyang snorted coldly. If the creatures of the divine land had not been moved in advance, would he have made his move? He was not distracted by this. He was fully focused on fighting the sovereign divine weapon. Aren't you afraid of implicating those innocent creatures? You are indeed a heartless person. The ancestral dragon sneered. Sigh. The Prince of Dragons sighed helplessly and looked at the ancestral dragon. Uncle Black Dragon, can you stop talking? The ancestral dragon was slightly stunned. He looked at the Prince of Dragons and asked, Your Highness, what do you mean? Do you remember last time? Qin Feiyang brought the Sunset Divine Bow and other heaven-defying divine weapons to attack the Divine Dragon Island. But suddenly stopped? The Prince of Dragons asked. Yes. The ancestral dragon nodded. Then have you thought about why he stopped at that time? And why did he choose to attack the Divine Dragon Island 2 months later? The Prince of Dragons said. The ancestral dragon could not help but frown. Let me tell you. As expected, he has already moved all the creatures of the divine land to the Black Tortoise realm, or to the 4 major regions in the past 2 months. The Prince of Dragons said. Moved. The dragon god's face stiffened. That's right. We dragons are imprisoned in the Divine Dragon Island. There is no one guarding the entrances of the north, west, south, and east seas. Now, any creature can enter and leave the divine land at will. So what you said doesn't exist at all. I'm afraid there's no one left in the divine prefecture. The Prince of Dragons said. Damn it. Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon roared. This is Qin Feiyang. No matter what he does, he will arrange everything in advance, eliminating all the worries in the future. At the same time, it also means that he has made up his mind to fight us to the death today. Therefore, today's battle not only concerns the fate of the humans, but also the fate of us dragons. The Prince of Dragons said. The Black Dragon Ancestor Dragon snorted coldly and said, Don't be afraid, we have sovereign divine weapons. Sovereign weapon? The Prince of the Dragons murmured as he looked at Qin Feiyang and the sovereign divine weapon. He shouldn't have doubted the existence of a sovereign weapon. After all, sovereign weapons were invincible existences. But now, looking at Qin Feiyang's calm face, he couldn't help but wonder if the sovereign divine weapon could really kill this person. High in the sky, although Qin Feiyang had been in a defensive state, the battle was extremely fierce. Moreover, because the speed of the sovereign divine weapon was too fast, his situation was also extremely dangerous. If he wasn't careful, he would lose his life. After all, this was not a supreme-level artifact, nor was it a heaven-defying artifact. It was a sovereign divine weapon. A divine weapon of this level was equivalent to the ruler of this world. However, although they had been fighting for so long, until now, Qin Feiyang had never seen the true appearance of the sovereign divine weapon, so he still didn't know what kind of artifact it was. Clang! Thousands of sword chi swept across the sky. Qin Feiyang kept waving the blood-colored sword, disintegrating the attacks of the sovereign divine weapon again and again. About 100 breaths passed. Qin Feiyang suddenly opened his eyes. 2 rays of divine light burst out and sneered. The sovereign divine weapon is only as so. Although only 100 breaths had passed, he had already figured out the trajectory of the sovereign divine weapon. As his voice fell, he grabbed the blood-colored sword with both hands and slashed to the left without hesitation. He didn't hold back his strength. Clang! In just an instant, the blood-colored sword and the sovereign divine weapon collided in the void, and a destructive power suddenly rolled out. At that moment, the sovereign divine weapon was sent flying, revealing its true appearance. It was a milky white sword, more than 1 meter long and 3 fingers wide. A holy dragon was engraved on the sword, vivid and lifelike. This is the sovereign divine weapon. Lord Longzuan, what is this sovereign divine weapon called? Everyone on the dragons looked at the sovereign divine weapon with awe in their eyes. because many of the dragons had seen the true appearance of the sovereign divine weapon for the first time. It's called the Dragon God Sword, Longzuan said. The Dragon God Sword. Everyone murmured. Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon roared. The Dragon God Sword, quickly kill this child. Yes, Lord Divine Sword, quickly kill him and restore the might of our dragons. Blood Dragon Ancestral Dragon, and the others also roared. Longzuan's expression changed slightly, and he hurriedly scolded. Don't be rude to Lord Divine Sword, and don't order him. The 10 ancestral dragons were shocked and quickly shut their mouths. That's right. How could the sovereign divine weapon be ordered by people like them? If they were not careful, they would anger the Dragon God Sword and leave them, the dragons, alone. Then the end of the dragons would come. The Dragon God Sword. Qin Feiyang muttered, glancing at the Dragon God Sword, and said, as a sovereign divine weapon, instead of protecting the world, you are helping the evildoers. Aren't you afraid of being laughed at by the world? This sovereign's duty is to protect the dragons. The Dragon God Sword actually responded to Qin Feiyang. What a good duty! Qin Feiyang was so angry that he laughed, grabbed the blood-colored sword and slashed out. Immediately, a blood-colored sword chi roared in the sky, charging towards the Dragon God Sword. Clang! At the same time, the Dragon God Sword's divine light shone brightly, and a milky white sword chi also appeared, like a huge wave. It blasted towards the blood-colored sword chi. The two sword chis collided fiercely. The wind howled, and the world darkened. A destructive aura crazily surged in all directions. Not only the inland sea, but more than half of the north, west, south, and east were also destroyed. Today, the land of the gods was destined to be destroyed. Your duty is to protect the dragons, and Qin Feiyang's duty, is to protect the world. So today I must destroy you. Even if you are a sovereign divine weapon, I will step over your body and bury the dragons with my own hands. Qin Feiyang held the blood-colored sword, and for the first time took the initiative to attack. The blood-colored sword's edge was monstrous, and it tore through the chaos, as if it was a sword that could split heaven and earth. At the same time, it also carried Qin Feiyang's monstrous anger, and charged towards the Dragon God Sword. Destroy the sovereign? You are the first human who dares to say such a thing. But you will also have to pay the price for it. The heavenly Dragon God Sword's voice was imbued with an immense might, as if it were the ruler of heaven and earth. The sword chis surged, and they transformed into a heavenly dragon, which pounced toward Qin Feiyang with bared fangs and brandished claws. Don't be too confident. Qin Feiyang's hair billowed in anger, and he raised the blood-colored sword and slashed at the heavenly dragon with all his might. Boom! Following an earth-shattering boom, the heavenly dragon formed by the sword chis was instantly pulverized in the void. Qin Feiyang used the movement seal, and he instantly approached the heavenly Dragon God Sword. The blood-colored sword hummed, and he directly slashed at the heavenly Dragon God Sword's body. Clang! The two divine weapons clashed. Although the blood-colored sword was formed by Qin Feiyang's killing intent, it had to be known that at the same time, it also absorbed the blood of countless living beings. It carried with it the will and determination of countless living beings. It was even harder than divine metal. It was a sovereign divine weapon, a super-killing weapon forged with the blood of countless living beings. When the sword fell, the heavenly Dragon God Sword was immediately sent flying, and sparks flew in all directions like dazzling fireworks. And on the blade of the sword there was a gap. How is this possible? The dragon sovereign exclaimed, and his body couldn't help but tremble. The blood-colored sword actually damaged the heavenly Dragon God Sword? Was this a dream? The heavenly Dragon God Sword was a sovereign divine weapon. The various ancestral dragons, Wang Chang, the group of human supreme beings, the countless dragons, and the millions of humans were all dumbfounded. The power of the slaughter domain had already reached such a level? It could even damage a sovereign divine weapon? Even the prince of the dragons, who had always been in a calm state, couldn't help but reveal a look of shock. So the slaughter domain could be this powerful. What an eye-opener. However, the price was also quite high. In order to open the slaughter domain, who knew how much blood Qin Feiyang had absorbed? Originally, according to the secular world, He was a true devil. But the key point was, the world didn't think so. In the eyes of the world, he was a hero. This might be the reason why the dragons were too cruel in the past. If the dragons could treat people with courtesy and rule the world with benevolence and righteousness, why would the humans and living beings of the ancient world hate the dragons so much? In other words, it was the dragons who had achieved Qin Feiyang's current status and prestige in the hearts of the world. The so-called people's hearts were in favor of this principle. Thinking of this, the prince of the dragons couldn't help but look at the dragon sovereign and the others. It seemed that his mother and the various ancestral dragons hadn't realized this yet. High up in the sky, the heavenly dragon god sword floated in the void, and the divine light was dazzling. It didn't move. It seemed to be surprised that the blood-colored sword could hurt its body. Do you feel embarrassed? It was actually hurt by a blood-colored sword condensed from killing intent? Qin Feiyang looked coldly at the dragon god sword. The dragon god sword was silent. You're wrong. This isn't just a simple blood-colored sword. Do you know, the blood I absorbed didn't force any living beings. Whether it's humans or beasts, they all did it willingly. And most living beings have an obsession in their hearts. And that is to destroy the dragons and end the inhumane rule of the dragons. So I'm not fighting alone. All living beings are fighting with me. My will is their will. Today, the dragons must be destroyed. You can't stop it. Qin Feiyang roared. The blood-colored sword bloomed with a monstrous blood-colored light, turning the world into a blood-red color, like a scene of azure purgatory. Within the blood-colored light, one could vaguely hear the roars of countless living beings. The dragons must die. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.